The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made your skin prickle. In the ancient lands of the Norse, stories of the Draugr were whispered by firelight, tales of cursed beings who rose from their graves to haunt the living. These weren't just stories to scare children, they were warnings etched into the very soul of every village. The Draugr were not ordinary undead. Born from the darkest curses, they were warriors and chieftains who refused to accept death. Their spirits, consumed by greed and vengeance, twisted their corpses into terrifying shapes. Eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light, they possessed superhuman strength and a thirst for destruction. They could walk through solid walls, swim through rock, and bring nightmares to life. In the beginning, when the world was young, the gods walked among mortals. Their battles and love affairs left marks on the earth and shaped the fate of men. But with the gods came their enemies, and among them, the Draugr were the most feared. Born from the greed of men and the curses of the gods, Draugr were a reminder that even in death, one's deeds could come back to haunt them. The creation of a Draugr began with a curse. A man who betrayed his kin, a warrior who fought dishonorably, or a chieftain who hoarded wealth at the expense of his people, these were the souls destined for such a fate. As they lay dying, their spirits would be claimed by dark forces, refusing to pass into the afterlife. Their bodies, buried with riches and weapons, would lie in wait, festering with resentment and dark magic. In the quiet village of Solheim, nestled between towering mountains and dense forests, life carried on much as it had for centuries. The villagers were hardy folk, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the earth and the changing seasons. They worshipped the old gods and honored their ancestors with solemn rituals. Solheim was a small village, but its heart was strong. At the center of the village stood a great hall, where the chieftain, Haldr, held court. Haldr was a man of immense strength and wisdom, respected by all who knew him. His wife, Astrid, was the village healer, known for her gentle touch and vast knowledge of herbs. Together, they had a son, Leif, a spirited young boy with a thirst for adventure and a heart full of curiosity. The villagers gathered in the great hall for celebrations, feasts, and meetings. It was here that the old skald, Eirik, would tell tales of gods and heroes, his voice weaving magic into the air. Children sat wide-eyed as he spoke of Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, and Loki's trickery. But the stories that lingered longest in their minds were those of the Draugr. Eirik's voice would drop to a hushed whisper as he described the Draugr. He spoke of their icy touch, their eyes that glowed with a sinister light, and their insatiable hunger for revenge. The fire would crackle, casting shadows on the walls, as the villagers listened, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and fascination. But in Solheim, tales of the Draugr were more than just stories. The village was built near an ancient burial mound, a place where the dead were laid to rest with their treasures. For generations, the villagers had tended to the mound, offering sacrifices and prayers to keep the spirits at peace. Yet, there were always whispers that something dark stirred beneath the earth. One winter's night, as the wind howled through the trees and snow blanketed the ground, strange things began to happen. Livestock went missing, and villagers spoke of seeing shadows move in the darkness. It was as if the very air had turned cold and heavy with dread. Haldr and the village elders gathered in the great hall, their faces grim. "There is something unnatural afoot," Haldr said, his voice low. "We must find out what is disturbing the peace of our ancestors." The villagers, armed with torches and weapons, ventured to the burial mound. The night was thick with fog, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow. As they approached the mound, a chill ran down their spines. The ground seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the entrance to the mound yawned open like the mouth of a beast. Leif, too young to join the search party, watched from the edge of the village, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. He had heard the stories all his life, but now, they were coming to life before his eyes. He clutched a small wooden sword, a gift from his father, and whispered a prayer to the gods for protection. The men entered the mound, their torches flickering in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. As they ventured deeper, they could feel eyes watching them, a presence that made their skin crawl. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the tunnel, extinguishing their torches. In the pitch black, they heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down their spines. Halder's voice rang out, steady and strong. "Stay together. Do not let fear take hold." But it was too late. Panic set in, and the men stumbled in the darkness, their minds filled with visions of the Draugr. One by one, they felt the icy touch of death as the Draugr emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with malevolence. In the village, Leif saw the flickering lights go out and heard the distant screams. His heart raced, and he knew something terrible had happened. He wanted to run to his father, to help, but Astrid held him back, her face pale with fear. "Stay here, my son," she whispered. "There is nothing you can do now." As dawn broke, the villagers who had stayed behind gathered at the edge of the forest, their faces etched with worry. Halder and a few others emerged from the burial mound, battered and bloodied. Their eyes told the story of the horrors they had faced. "The Draugr are real," Halder said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We must protect our village. We must find a way to send these spirits back to the afterlife." The village of Solheim, once a place of peace and prosperity, now stood on the brink of darkness. The Draugr had awakened, and their curse threatened to consume them all. The first sign was a scream in the dead of night, piercing the cold air and waking the village. Livestock had gone missing before, but this was different. The animals were restless, their eyes wide with fear, and the village dogs howled, refusing to be calmed. People whispered about the burial mound, its presence like a dark shadow looming over Solheim. One morning, Ingrid, a young woman known for her calm nature, came running into the village square, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She had been collecting herbs near the mound when she felt a cold hand brush her shoulder. When she turned, there was nothing there. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and the villagers listened, their hearts heavy with dread. Later that week, Eric the blacksmith discovered his tools scattered around his forge, though he was certain he had put them away. He found strange footprints leading towards the burial mound. They were large and deep, unlike any animal tracks he had ever seen. Eric was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy, but he could not shake the feeling that something was watching him. The nights grew longer and colder, the wind howling through the village like a mournful spirit. The villagers began to notice other strange occurrences. Doors that had been securely latched were found wide open in the morning. The air near the burial mound was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. Children spoke of shadows moving just beyond the light of their fires. Old Eirik, the skald, was among those who felt the change most acutely. He was an old man with eyes that had seen many winters, and he knew the signs. He had heard the stories from his own grandfather, tales of restless spirits and the Draugr's curse. One night, as he sat by the fire, he felt a cold presence behind him. Turning slowly, he saw a figure at the edge of the light, its eyes glowing like embers. Eirik closed his eyes and whispered an ancient prayer, and when he opened them, the figure was gone. In the great hall, Halder gathered the village elders. Their faces were etched with worry, lines deepened by the flickering firelight. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing the strange events that had been happening. Halder's strong voice was tinged with unease as he addressed them. "There is unrest in the burial mound," he said. "We must find out what is causing this disturbance before it brings ruin upon us all." The villagers decided to send a small group to investigate. Among them was Leif, eager to prove his bravery, despite his mother's protests. He joined Eric, Ingrid, and a few others as they made their way towards the burial mound. The air grew colder with each step, and an unnatural silence settled over them. As they approached the mound, a foul stench filled the air, like the smell of rot and decay. The entrance yawned open, dark and foreboding. Leif felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he gripped his father's sword tightly, refusing to show fear. They lit their torches and stepped inside, the light flickering on the ancient stone walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The further they went, the colder it became, their breath visible in the dim light. Shadows danced on the walls, and they could almost hear whispers, faint and indistinct, like the murmurs of the dead. In the deepest chamber, they found what they were looking for. The burial mound had been disturbed. Coffins lay broken, their lids smashed, and the treasures of the dead scattered across the floor. The air was thick with the smell of death, and a sense of malevolence hung heavy in the room. Eric knelt beside one of the broken coffins, his face pale. "These graves have been defiled," he said, his voice trembling. "Something has awakened the spirits within." Ingrid pointed to a large, deep footprint in the dust. "This is not the work of men," she whispered. "Something far more powerful and ancient has been here." Leif felt a chill run down his spine as he looked around the chamber. He could feel eyes watching him, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. He thought of the stories Eirik had told, of the Draugr and their cursed existence. He knew, in his heart, that they were facing something far worse than they had imagined. As they turned to leave, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their torches. Panic set in, and they stumbled in the darkness, their minds filled with fear. Leif could hear the whispers growing louder, the sound of something ancient and angry awakening from its slumber. They emerged from the mound, gasping for breath, their faces pale with terror. The village awaited them, gathered in the square, their eyes filled with hope and fear. Halder stepped forward, his face grim as he listened to their tale. "We must prepare," Halder said, his voice steady. "The Draugr have awakened, and they will not rest until they have their vengeance." The villagers worked through the night, fortifying their homes and preparing for the worst. Mothers clutched their children tightly, and fathers sharpened their weapons, their faces set with determination. Leif stood beside his father, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the village of Solheim stood ready. The Draugr had risen, and their curse hung over the village like a dark cloud. But the people of Solheim were strong, and they would face this ancient evil with courage and resolve. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel amplified. Leif walked cautiously, his breath visible in the cold air. He had gone out to collect firewood before nightfall, but the shadows were already lengthening, and an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. His father had warned him to stay close to the village, but Leif wanted to prove he was brave. As he gathered sticks, he heard a faint rustling behind him. He turned, his heart racing, but saw nothing. Trying to shake off his fear, he continued his task. Then, he heard it again, closer this time. A chill ran down his spine, and he gripped his small axe tightly. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. There was no reply, only the eerie silence. Leif took a step back, his eyes scanning the trees. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. It was tall and gaunt, its movements unnatural and jerky. Leif's heart pounded in his chest as the figure stepped into the light. It was a Draugr. The creature's eyes glowed with a cold, blue light, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. It wore the remnants of ancient armor, and its fingers ended in long, sharp claws. The Draugr's mouth twisted into a ghastly smile, revealing rotting teeth. Leif's body froze with fear. For a moment, neither moved. Then, the Draugr lunged. Leif's instincts took over, and he turned to run, dropping his firewood in his haste. The forest seemed to blur around him as he sprinted, branches clawing at his clothes and face. He could hear the Draugr behind him, its footsteps heavy and relentless. Leif's lungs burned as he pushed himself to run faster. He could feel the creature's icy breath on his neck, its malevolent presence pressing down on him. He stumbled over a root and fell, his knee hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through his leg, but he forced himself to get up and keep running. Ahead, he saw the flickering lights of the village. Hope surged through him, but the Draugr was close, too close. Leif could almost feel its claws reaching for him. Desperation gave him one last burst of speed as he burst into the clearing, screaming for help. The villagers reacted quickly. Halder and Eric, armed with torches and weapons, rushed to meet him. The Draugr halted at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes narrowing at the sight of the armed villagers. It let out a guttural growl, a sound filled with hatred and hunger, before retreating back into the shadows. Leif collapsed into his father's arms, gasping for breath. His body trembled with fear and exhaustion. Haldr held him tightly, his face pale but resolute. The villagers gathered around, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. "It was a Draugr," Leif managed to whisper. "I saw it." Haldr nodded, his jaw set. "We know, son. We're ready for it." That night, the village of Solheim was on high alert. The men stood guard with torches and weapons, while the women and children huddled inside their homes, praying for protection. Leif lay in his bed, his mind replaying the encounter over and over. The image of the Draugr's glowing eyes haunted him, and he knew sleep would not come easily. Hours passed, and the village remained tense. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The Draugr had retreated for now, but the villagers knew it was only a matter of time before it returned. The ancient curse had been awakened, and they would have to fight with all their strength to survive. Leif's heart ached with fear and guilt. He had ventured too far, seeking to prove his bravery, and now the village was in danger. He vowed silently to do whatever it took to protect his family and his home. The Draugr were real, and their curse was upon them, but Leif would face it with courage. As dawn broke, the villagers gathered in the square. Haldr addressed them, his voice strong and steady. "We have seen the enemy," he said. "But we will not let fear rule us. We will fight to protect our home and our loved ones. Together, we are strong." The villagers nodded, their resolve hardening. They had faced many challenges before, but this was unlike any they had encountered. The Draugr were relentless, driven by ancient curses and dark magic. But the people of Solheim were united, and they would stand together against the darkness. Leif stood by his father's side, his heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. The first sighting of the Draugr had shaken them all, but it had also strengthened their resolve. They would fight, and they would not give up. The village prepared for the battles to come, each person playing their part. The old legends had come to life, and they were living through a story that would be told for generations. The Draugr had risen, but so had the courage of the people of Solheim. The great hall was filled with a tense silence as the village elders gathered, their faces etched with worry. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Haldr, the chieftain, stood at the head of the room, his eyes grave as he looked at each of the elders. They had faced many challenges together, but this one was different. The Draugr were a threat unlike any they had encountered. Eric, the blacksmith, broke the silence. "We cannot ignore this any longer. The Draugr are real, and they are here. We must find a way to protect our village." Ingrid, the healer, nodded. "I have seen the fear in the eyes of our people. We cannot let this curse destroy us. We must act now." Eirik, the old skald, leaned forward, his voice trembling with age and the weight of his words. "The Draugr are bound by dark magic, created by curses and the restless spirits of the dead. We must find a way to break the curse and send them back to the underworld." Haldr took a deep breath, his mind racing with the stories he had heard as a child. He knew the legends well, but facing them in reality was a different matter. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. "How do we fight something that is already dead?" The room fell silent again, each elder lost in their thoughts. Finally, Astrid, Haldr's wife and the village's most knowledgeable healer, spoke up. "We must seek the wisdom of the gods. The old ways have power, and we must use every resource we have to protect our people." Haldr nodded, grateful for her strength. "We will consult the runes and offer sacrifices. We must do everything in our power to turn the tide." Leif, who had been standing quietly at the back of the hall, stepped forward. His face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "I saw the Draugr up close. It was terrifying, but it also felt sad. Like it was in pain. Maybe there's a way to help them find peace." The elders looked at him, surprised by his words. Eirik nodded slowly. "There is wisdom in what the boy says. The Draugr are driven by anger and vengeance, but they were once men. Perhaps we can find a way to end their suffering and lift the curse." Haldr placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride and fear mingling in his eyes. We will consider every option, but we must be prepared for battle as well. The Draugr will not wait while we search for answers." The elders agreed, and they began to formulate a plan. They would fortify the village, set up watchmen, and prepare for an attack. But they would also seek the guidance of the gods and try to understand the nature of the curse. That night, the village was a hive of activity. Men and women worked side by side, strengthening the walls and gathering supplies. Children were kept close, their wide eyes filled with fear and curiosity. The old skald Eirik sat by the fire, carving runes into wooden talismans for protection. His hands shook, but his mind was focused on the task at hand. In the center of the village, a large pyre was built for the offering. The villagers gathered around, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Halder stepped forward, holding a small, carved wooden statue of Thor, the god of thunder and protection. He raised it high, his voice strong and clear. "Great Thor, protector of mankind, hear our plea. We offer this sacrifice to you, seeking your strength and guidance. Help us to protect our home and our loved ones. Give us the courage to face this ancient evil." He placed the statue on the pyre, and the flames roared higher, the heat intense. The villagers watched in awe, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and fear. As the fire burned, Astrid began to chant, her voice rising and falling in an ancient rhythm. The air seemed to shimmer with energy, and for a moment, it felt as if the gods were truly listening. Leif stood beside his mother, his heart pounding. He watched the flames dance, feeling a strange connection to the old stories and the power of the gods. He whispered a silent prayer, hoping that they would find a way to save their village. As the night wore on, the elders gathered again in the great hall. They had consulted the runes, and the message was clear. The Draugr were bound by a powerful curse, one that could only be broken by a great act of bravery and sacrifice. They would need to confront the Draugr head-on, but also find a way to understand their pain and offer them peace. Halder looked around the room, his eyes meeting each of the elders. "We have our task," he said, his voice steady. "We will fight with all our strength, but we will also seek to lift the curse. Together, we will protect our village." The elders nodded, their resolve strengthened. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were united in their purpose. The Draugr had awakened, and their ancient curse hung over Solheim like a dark cloud. But the village had faced many challenges before, and they would face this one with courage and determination. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the village of Solheim stood ready. The elders had made their plan, and the people were prepared. The Draugr were a formidable foe, but the strength and unity of the village would be their greatest weapon. Together, they would face the darkness and fight for their home. The morning sun cast a soft glow over the village of Solheim, but the air was still heavy with the tension of the previous night's events. As the villagers went about their work, their movements were hurried and their voices hushed. Fear lingered in the hearts of everyone, but amidst this fear, a sense of determination began to take root. In the midst of the preparations, a young man stood out. His name was Bjorn, a blacksmith's apprentice known for his strength and kindness. His father, Erik, had taught him the trade, but Bjorn's heart had always yearned for more. He dreamed of being a warrior, of protecting his village and the people he loved. Bjorn's mother, Freya, had died when he was young, and he carried her memory with him always. She had been gentle and wise, teaching him the old stories and the ways of the gods. Her death had left a void in his heart, but it had also given him a fierce determination to honor her memory. As Bjorn worked in the forge, the heat from the fire warming his face, he thought about the Draugr and the fears they had brought to Solheim. His hands moved with practiced skill, shaping the metal into a strong, sharp blade. He knew that the village needed more than just weapons, they needed hope. When the elders had gathered the night before, Bjorn had listened from the shadows, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. He had heard the stories of the Draugr, the restless dead who rose from their graves to wreak havoc on the living. But he had also heard the old legends of heroes who had faced such darkness and emerged victorious. As he finished his work, Bjorn wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the blade he had forged. It was strong and true, a weapon worthy of a warrior. He made a decision then, one that had been forming in his heart for a long time. He would not stand by and let his village fall to the Draugr. He would fight, and he would protect those he loved. Bjorn found his father in the great hall, deep in discussion with Halder and the other elders. Eric's face was lined with worry, but his eyes were sharp and determined. Bjorn approached them, his heart in his throat. "Father," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that churned inside him. "I want to help. I want to protect our village from the Draugr." Eric looked at his son, his expression softening with pride and concern. "Bjorn, you are strong and brave, but this is not a fight for the faint of heart. The Draugr are powerful and relentless." "I know," Bjorn replied, his eyes meeting his father's. "But I cannot stand by and do nothing. I must try. For Mother, and for all of us." Halder stepped forward, his gaze appraising the young man before him. "Bjorn, your courage is commendable. But this is not just about fighting. We need to understand the Draugr, to find a way to break the curse." Bjorn nodded. "I will do whatever it takes. I will fight, and I will learn. I will not let fear rule me." The elders exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and concern. Eirik, the old skald, spoke up, his voice filled with the wisdom of many winters. "The gods have chosen their hero. Bjorn, you have a great task ahead of you. But know that you do not face it alone. We are with you." Bjorn felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of pride, fear, and determination. He looked at the faces of the elders, the people he had known his entire life, and he knew that he would do whatever it took to protect them. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Bjorn stood before the village. The people of Solheim gathered around, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the torches. Bjorn raised his sword, the blade gleaming in the firelight. "People of Solheim," he called out, his voice strong and clear. "The Draugr have risen, and their curse threatens our home. But we will not give in to fear. We will fight, and we will find a way to lift this curse. I vow to protect our village, to stand against the darkness, and to bring peace to our land." The villagers cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of support and hope. Bjorn felt the weight of their trust and love, and he knew that he would do everything in his power to honor his vow. As the night wore on, Bjorn stood watch with the other warriors, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the Draugr. The cold wind whispered through the trees, and he could feel the presence of the ancient curse hanging over the village. But he also felt the warmth of his mother's memory, the strength of his father's teachings, and the support of his people. In the quiet moments before dawn, Bjorn whispered a prayer to the gods, seeking their guidance and strength. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. He was not just a blacksmith's apprentice anymore. He was a hero, chosen by the gods to protect his village from the Draugr. And he would not fail. The night was still and unnervingly silent, an unnatural calm that set the villagers of Solheim on edge. Bjorn stood watch with the other warriors, his grip tight on his sword. The cold air bit at his skin, but it was the chill of fear that truly cut deep. He knew that the Draugr were out there, waiting, biding their time. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. The sound came from the edge of the village, near the old burial mound. Bjorn's heart lurched as he turned to see a figure running towards them, panic etched on their face. It was Sigurd, a young farmer, his eyes wide with terror. "They're here!" Sigurd gasped, pointing towards the forest. "The Draugr are coming!" Before anyone could react, a haunting, otherworldly howl echoed through the trees. Shadows moved between the trunks, and the Draugr emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Their forms were twisted and grotesque, the stench of death clinging to them as they advanced. The village erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran, trying to find safety. The warriors moved to intercept the Draugr, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. Bjorn led the charge, his sword raised high. The first Draugr he faced swung a decayed, clawed hand at him, but Bjorn dodged and struck, his blade slicing through the creature's putrid flesh. The Draugr let out a guttural roar and fell, but more were coming. Bjorn fought with all his strength, his mind focused on protecting his home and his people. Around him, the other warriors did the same, their shouts mingling with the cries of the villagers and the eerie wails of the Draugr. In the midst of the battle, Bjorn caught sight of a small figure huddled by a burning hut. It was Runa, a little girl he had often seen playing near the forge. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she clutched a small wooden doll to her chest. Without hesitation, Bjorn fought his way to her, his sword cutting down any Draugr that dared to approach. "Runa," he called, reaching her side. "We have to get you to safety." Runa looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared, Bjorn." He scooped her up, holding her close as he fought his way back to the main square. "You're safe now, Runa. I won't let anything happen to you." As he reached the square, he saw that the villagers were making a stand. Eric and Halder were at the forefront, their weapons flashing in the firelight. The Draugr were relentless, but the villagers were fighting with a courage born of desperation. Bjorn handed Runa to her mother, who held her tightly and whispered words of comfort. He turned back to the fight, his heart pounding with fear and anger. The Draugr had brought terror to his home, but he would not let them take it. He fought his way to his father, who was battling a particularly large and vicious Draugr. Eric's face was set with grim determination, but Bjorn could see the weariness in his eyes. Together, they struck at the creature, their swords moving in unison. With a final, powerful blow, the Draugr fell, its body dissolving into a foul-smelling mist. "We have to hold the line," Eric said, his voice hoarse. "We cannot let them overrun us." Bjorn nodded, his resolve hardening. "We won't. We will fight to the last." The battle raged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. The villagers fought with everything they had, but the Draugr were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. The air was filled with the sounds of clashing weapons, desperate cries, and the eerie wails of the Draugr. Bjorn's muscles ached, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he kept fighting. He thought of his mother, of the promise he had made to protect his village. He thought of Runa, her small, frightened face giving him the strength to keep going. Just as it seemed the Draugr might overwhelm them, a bright light appeared at the edge of the village. It was Astrid, Halder's wife, holding a torch high. She began to chant, her voice strong and clear. The runes she had carved earlier glowed with a fierce light, and the Draugr recoiled, their howls of rage turning to screams of pain. The villagers took heart, their spirits lifted by the sight. They fought with renewed vigor, pushing the Draugr back. Bjorn swung his sword with all his might, feeling the tide turn in their favor. The Draugr were retreating, their forms flickering and fading in the light of the runes. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, the last of the Draugr vanished, leaving behind only the scent of decay and the echoes of their terrible cries. The village was battered and bruised, but they had survived. Bjorn stood in the square, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He looked around at the faces of his fellow villagers, seeing the same mix of weariness and triumph in their eyes. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. Eric came to stand beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You fought well, Bjorn. Your mother would be proud." Bjorn nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We all fought well. We are stronger together." As the sun rose, casting a warm light over the village, Bjorn felt a sense of hope. The night had been one of terror and loss, but it had also shown the strength and courage of the people of Solheim. They had faced the Draugr and survived, and they would face whatever came next with the same determination and unity. Bjorn sat by the flickering fire in the great hall, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. The night of terror was behind them, but the fear and uncertainty lingered. As he gazed into the flames, lost in thought, his father Eric approached and sat beside him. "You fought bravely, Bjorn," Eric said, his voice filled with pride and fatigue. "But the Draugr will return. We need more than just our strength to defeat them." Bjorn nodded, his mind racing. There must be a way to end this curse for good. Eric's eyes gleamed with a hint of hope. There is an old legend, one that speaks of a weapon forged by the gods themselves. It is said to possess the power to vanquish the Draugr and lift their curse. Bjorn's heart quickened. Where can we find this weapon? Eirik, the old skald, joined them, his weathered face grave. The weapon you speak of is called Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. It is said to be hidden in the mountains, guarded by powerful enchantments and deadly creatures. Many have sought it, but none have returned. The weight of Eirik's words settled over them, but Bjorn felt a spark of determination ignite within him. I will find Mjolnir. I will bring it back and save our village. Eric's eyes filled with a mix of pride and fear. The journey will be perilous, my son. But if anyone can do it, it is you. The next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Bjorn prepared for his journey. He gathered supplies, his sword, and a small amulet his mother had given him when he was a child. It was a symbol of protection, and he hoped it would guide him on his quest. The villagers gathered to see him off, their faces filled with hope and concern. Halder clasped Bjorn's shoulder, his grip firm. Return to us, Bjorn. We are counting on you. With a final nod, Bjorn set off towards the mountains. The path was steep and treacherous, the air growing colder with each step. As he climbed higher, he thought of his mother and the stories she had told him. Her voice seemed to guide him, a comforting presence in the harsh wilderness. Days turned into weeks as Bjorn journeyed deeper into the mountains. The landscape grew more desolate, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. He faced many challenges: harsh weather, treacherous cliffs, and the ever-present threat of wild beasts. But he pressed on, driven by the hope of saving his village. One evening, as Bjorn made camp in a small cave, he noticed strange markings on the cave walls. They were ancient runes, glowing faintly in the dim light. He traced them with his fingers, feeling a surge of energy pass through him. The runes spoke of Mjolnir, hidden in a sacred chamber deep within the mountain. With renewed determination, Bjorn continued his journey, following the clues left by the ancient runes. The path led him to a narrow crevice in the rock, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. On the other side, he found himself in a vast cavern, the air filled with a palpable sense of power. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, and on it rested Mjolnir. The hammer was magnificent, its surface etched with intricate designs and ancient symbols. As Bjorn approached, he felt a surge of awe and reverence. He reached out, his hand trembling, and grasped the handle of the hammer. The moment his fingers touched the weapon, a blinding light enveloped him. He felt a rush of energy, like the power of the gods coursing through his veins. The light faded, and Bjorn stood, Mjolnir in his hand, feeling a strength and confidence he had never known. But his journey was not over. As he turned to leave the cavern, he was confronted by a figure cloaked in shadow. It was an ancient guardian, a creature of immense power, tasked with protecting the hammer. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as it advanced towards Bjorn. With Mjolnir in hand, Bjorn faced the guardian, his heart pounding. The creature lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Bjorn swung the hammer, and a bolt of lightning erupted from its surface, striking the guardian with a deafening crack. The creature roared in pain, but it was not defeated. The battle raged on, each strike of Mjolnir sending shockwaves through the cavern. Bjorn fought with every ounce of his strength, his determination fueled by the faces of his loved ones back in Solheim. Finally, with a mighty swing, he struck the guardian's heart, and the creature dissolved into a cloud of smoke. Breathing heavily, Bjorn stood victorious. He had claimed the legendary weapon and defeated its guardian. He felt the weight of the task ahead, but he also felt a new sense of hope and purpose. With Mjolnir in hand, he knew he could save his village. As he made his way back down the mountain, the journey seemed less daunting. The power of the hammer gave him strength, and the memory of his mother's teachings gave him courage. He knew that the battle against the Draugr was far from over, but he was ready to face it. Bjorn returned to Solheim a hero, Mjolnir gleaming in the sunlight. The villagers gathered around, their eyes wide with awe and hope. Halder stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. You have done it, Bjorn. You have found the weapon that will save us. Bjorn raised the hammer high, feeling the power of the gods flow through him. We will defeat the Draugr and lift the curse. Together, we will protect our home. The villagers cheered, their voices ringing out in the crisp mountain air. Bjorn felt a deep sense of fulfillment and pride. He had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. With Mjolnir by his side and the support of his people, he knew they could overcome any challenge. As the sun set over the mountains, casting a golden glow over the village, Bjorn stood with his father, Eric, and the other warriors. They were ready for the battle ahead, their hearts filled with hope and determination. The Draugr would come, but they would face them with the power of the gods and the strength of their unity. And so, with Mjolnir in hand and the love of his people behind him, Bjorn prepared for the final confrontation with the Draugr. The Night of Terror had been only the beginning, but now, armed with the legendary weapon, he was ready to end the curse and bring peace to Solheim. The wind howled through the trees as Bjorn prepared for another journey. This time, he wasn't searching for a weapon. He was searching for answers. The elders had told him of a wise seeress who lived deep in the forest, a woman said to possess knowledge of the Draugr's darkest secrets. With Mjolnir by his side and hope in his heart, Bjorn set out once again, determined to find her. The forest was dense and foreboding, each step taking him further from the safety of his village. Bjorn walked for hours, the shadows lengthening as the sun began to set. He felt the weight of his task pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't turn back. The seeress was his last hope. As night fell, Bjorn found himself in a small clearing. A full moon hung in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. He built a small fire, its flickering flames providing a semblance of warmth and comfort. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, and Bjorn's senses were on high alert. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, set his heart racing. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Bjorn jumped to his feet, Mjolnir at the ready. The figure stepped into the light, revealing an old woman with long, silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She moved with a grace that belied her age, her gaze steady and knowing. "Who are you?" Bjorn asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of kindness and wisdom. "I am the one you seek, Bjorn, son of Eric. I am Freya, the seeress." Relief washed over Bjorn, and he lowered Mjolnir. "I need your help. The Draugr have cursed my village, and I must find a way to stop them." Freya nodded, her expression turning serious. "The Draugr are ancient and powerful, but they are not invincible. Sit, and I will tell you what you need to know." Bjorn sat by the fire, his eyes fixed on the seeress. Freya began to speak, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The Draugr are the restless dead, souls who cannot find peace. They are driven by hatred and anger, bound to this world by powerful magic. To defeat them, you must understand their origin. Long ago, a great warrior named Rolf angered the gods with his greed and cruelty. As punishment, he was cursed to rise from his grave and terrorize the living. His spirit became the first Draugr, and his curse spread to others who shared his fate." Bjorn listened intently, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the Draugr's tragic origins. "How can I break the curse?" Freya's eyes softened with compassion. "To break the curse, you must find Rolf's tomb and destroy the source of his power. It will not be easy, for the tomb is guarded by his most loyal followers, now Draugr themselves. But there is hope. The power of Mjolnir, combined with the wisdom of the old runes, can help you." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, ancient-looking scroll. This scroll contains the runes of protection and binding. Use them wisely, and they will aid you in your quest. Bjorn took the scroll, feeling the weight of his responsibility grow heavier. "Thank you, Freya. I will not fail." Freya placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You have the strength and courage of a true hero, Bjorn. Remember that you are not alone. The spirits of those who have gone before you are with you, and the love of your people will guide you." Bjorn spent the night in the clearing, his mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead. He knew that the path would be fraught with danger, but he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. The seeress had given him the knowledge he needed, and now it was up to him to use it. As dawn broke, Bjorn stood and faced the forest once more. Freya watched him, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "Go now, Bjorn. The fate of your village rests in your hands." With a final nod, Bjorn turned and continued his journey. The forest seemed less ominous in the light of day, and he walked with a sense of determination. He knew that the path to Rolf's tomb would be long and perilous, but he also knew that he carried the hopes and dreams of his people with him. Days turned into weeks as Bjorn traveled through the wilderness, guided by the seeress's words and the ancient scroll. He encountered many trials along the way, fierce storms, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of wild beasts. But through it all, he held onto the hope that he could lift the curse and bring peace to his village. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Bjorn found himself at the edge of a vast, desolate plain. In the distance, he could see a dark, foreboding structure rising from the earth. It was Rolf's tomb, its ancient stones covered in moss and shadow. Bjorn's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew that the final battle lay ahead, but he also knew that he had come too far to turn back now. He clutched Mjolnir tightly, feeling the power of the gods flow through him. With each step, Bjorn felt the weight of his ancestors' spirits and the love of his people. He knew that he was not alone, and that gave him the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As he approached the tomb, he whispered a prayer to the gods, seeking their guidance and protection. The entrance to the tomb was guarded by two massive stone statues, their faces twisted in eternal grimaces. Bjorn felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped inside, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. The darkness seemed to close in around him, but he pressed on, guided by the faint glow of the ancient runes. Finally, he reached the heart of the tomb, where Rolf's sarcophagus lay. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the silence was deafening. Bjorn knew that the battle was about to begin, but he also knew that he had the power to end the curse once and for all. With a deep breath, Bjorn raised Mjolnir and prepared to face the Draugr that guarded Rolf's tomb. His heart pounded with fear and determination, but he knew that he had the strength and courage to prevail. The fate of his village rested in his hands, and he would not fail. As the shadows began to stir and the Draugr emerged, Bjorn stood his ground, ready to fight for the future of his people. He knew that the journey had been long and difficult, but he also knew that it had been worth it. With the power of Mjolnir and the wisdom of the seeress, he would lift the curse and bring peace to Solheim. The fire crackled softly, its light casting flickering shadows on the ancient stone walls. Bjorn sat across from Freya, the seeress, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had traveled far and faced many dangers to reach this moment. Freya's eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce through the veil of time itself. She leaned forward, her voice a gentle whisper that carried the weight of centuries. "You have come far, Bjorn," she began, her tone both comforting and grave. "But your journey is not over. The Draugr are ancient and powerful, and to defeat them, you must understand their nature and wield the right weapon." Bjorn's gaze never left her face. He felt a shiver run down his spine as she spoke, each word wrapping around him like a spell. "Tell me what I must do, Freya. I am ready to face whatever lies ahead." Freya nodded, her expression solemn. The Draugr were once great warriors, bound by a curse to roam the earth, their souls restless and filled with hatred. Their power comes from the dark magic that binds them, a magic rooted in vengeance and despair. Bjorn's heart ached at the thought of the cursed souls. How can I free them? How can I end this? The seeress closed her eyes for a moment, as if reaching out to some distant realm. When she opened them again, they glowed with an ethereal light. There is a weapon, forged in the fires of the gods, imbued with the power to sever the bonds of the Draugr. It is called the Sword of Skadi, named after the goddess of winter and vengeance. This sword is not just a weapon of war, but a symbol of redemption and release. Bjorn leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Where can I find this sword? Freya's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his hand. Her fingers were cool, yet her touch was soothing. The Sword of Skadi lies in the heart of the Frostlands, a place where few dare to tread. It is guarded by spirits of the old world, beings of ice and shadow. To reach it, you must face trials that will test your strength, your courage, and your soul. A chill settled over Bjorn at the mention of the Frostlands. He had heard tales of that desolate place, where even the bravest warriors feared to go. But the thought of his village, of the people he loved, gave him the resolve he needed. I will go, Freya. I will find the sword and bring an end to this curse. The seeress smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. I knew you would. But there is more you must know. The Draugr are drawn to the sword, for they know it can end their torment. They will do everything in their power to stop you. You must be prepared for their attacks, and you must guard the sword with your life. Bjorn felt a surge of determination. I will not fail. Freya rose and walked to a small chest in the corner of the room. She opened it and took out a small, intricately carved amulet. She handed it to Bjorn, her eyes serious. This amulet was given to me by my mother, and her mother before her. It is a talisman of protection. Wear it, and it will shield you from the darkest of spells. Bjorn accepted the amulet, feeling its power resonate through him. Thank you, Freya. I will treasure it. The seeress placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but firm. Remember, Bjorn, the path ahead is fraught with danger, but you carry the hopes of your people with you. The Draugr are powerful, but they are not invincible. With the Sword of Skadi and the strength of your heart, you can end this. As Bjorn prepared to leave, Freya's voice called out to him one last time. Bjorn, one more thing. The sword will only reveal its true power to one who is pure of heart and intention. Let your love for your people and your desire to end their suffering guide you. Only then will you unlock the sword's full potential. Bjorn nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing the trials that lay ahead. But he also felt a newfound strength, a sense of purpose that burned brighter than ever. With the amulet around his neck and the seeress's prophecy in his heart, he stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey to the Frostlands would be long and perilous, but Bjorn was undeterred. The seeress's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the stakes and the hope that lay within his grasp. As he walked through the dark forest, he felt the amulet's protection and the power of Mjolnir at his side. The moonlight guided his steps, and Bjorn felt a sense of calm settle over him. He knew that the road would be difficult, that the Draugr would stop at nothing to keep him from the sword. But he also knew that he had the strength to overcome any obstacle. The fate of his village depended on him, and he would not let them down. With each step, Bjorn felt his resolve strengthen. The Frostlands awaited, a place of ice and shadow, but also the resting place of the Sword of Skadi. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by the love for his people and the hope of ending the curse that had plagued them for so long. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, Bjorn felt a sense of hope and determination. He knew that the seeress's prophecy was more than just words, it was a beacon of light guiding him through the darkness. And with that light, he would find the strength to face the Draugr and bring peace to his village once and for all. Bjorn stood alone in the clearing, the early morning mist curling around his feet. His breath formed clouds in the chilly air, but he barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing, preparing for the battle that lay ahead. The seeress had told him what he needed to do, and now it was time to make himself worthy of the task. The days were long and grueling. Bjorn pushed his body to its limits, rising with the sun and training until the stars dotted the night sky. He practiced with Mjolnir, honing his skills with the mighty hammer until it felt like an extension of his own arm. He swung it with precision and power, each blow filled with the determination to protect his village. But it wasn't just his physical strength that needed honing. Bjorn knew that he needed to be mentally prepared for the Draugr. He spent hours meditating, clearing his mind of fear and doubt. He thought of his family, his friends, and the people who depended on him. Their faces gave him strength and reminded him why he was fighting. Freya often watched from the edge of the clearing, her wise eyes following his every move. She guided him with her words, teaching him the old ways and the secrets of the runes. She showed him how to channel his inner strength, to draw on the power of his ancestors. One day, as Bjorn was practicing his combat skills, Freya approached him. Her presence was like a calming breeze, bringing a moment of peace to his intense training. "Bjorn, you are doing well, but there is more to being a warrior than strength and skill." Bjorn paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What more do I need, Freya? I'm giving everything I have." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You must learn to trust your instincts, to listen to the whispers of the wind and the songs of the earth. The Draugr are cunning and relentless. You need to be one step ahead of them." Bjorn nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the earth beneath his feet, the air in his lungs. He let his senses guide him, tuning into the world around him. It was as if he could feel the heartbeat of the land, a steady rhythm that connected him to everything. The next day, Freya led Bjorn to a hidden grove deep within the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, the light filtering through the leaves in a soft, golden glow. "This place is sacred," she said. "Here, you will find the strength of your ancestors." Bjorn knelt on the ground, feeling the energy of the grove surround him. He closed his eyes and listened to Freya's voice as she chanted an ancient song. The words were unfamiliar, but their meaning resonated deep within him. He felt a surge of power, a connection to those who had come before him. For hours, Bjorn stayed in the grove, absorbing its energy and letting it fill him. He felt a sense of peace and clarity that he had never known before. When he finally stood, he felt lighter, stronger, more focused. As the days turned into weeks, Bjorn's training continued. He faced countless challenges, both physical and mental. He climbed the tallest trees, swam through icy rivers, and ran across the rugged terrain. Each trial pushed him further, testing his limits and forcing him to dig deep within himself for the strength to continue. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Freya approached Bjorn with a solemn expression. "The time is near, Bjorn. You have trained hard, but there is one final test you must face." Bjorn looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "What must I do?" Freya led him to a small, secluded cave. Inside this cave lies a creature of darkness, a guardian of the Draugr secrets. You must face it and emerge victorious. Only then will you be ready to confront the Draugr. Bjorn took a deep breath and stepped into the cave. The darkness was overwhelming, but he pressed on, guided by the faint glow of the runes he had learned from Freya. The air grew colder, and he could hear the faint sound of something moving in the shadows. Suddenly, the creature lunged at him, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Bjorn swung Mjolnir with all his might, the hammer connecting with the creature's side. It let out a terrifying roar and retaliated, its claws slashing through the air. Bjorn dodged and struck again, each blow fueled by the training and strength he had gained. The battle raged on, but Bjorn remained focused, his movements precise and powerful. He could feel the energy of the grove, the strength of his ancestors, guiding him. With one final, mighty swing, he brought Mjolnir down on the creature, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Breathing heavily, Bjorn emerged from the cave, the weight of the final test lifting from his shoulders. Freya met him with a proud smile. "You have done well, Bjorn. You are ready." Bjorn felt a sense of accomplishment and resolve. He had faced his fears, pushed his limits, and emerged stronger. He was ready to face the Draugr and protect his village. As he looked out over the forest, he felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The training had been hard, but it had prepared him for the battle ahead. He knew that with the strength of his ancestors and the power of the Sword of Skadi, he could lift the curse and bring peace to his people. The village square was silent, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Bjorn stood in the center, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his friends and neighbors. Each one carried a look of fear, but beneath it, Bjorn could see something more, hope. He took a deep breath, knowing that the words he spoke next would shape the fate of their village. "My friends," he began, his voice strong and steady, "the Draugr are powerful, but they are not invincible. We have a chance to fight back, to protect our home and our loved ones. But I cannot do this alone. I need your help. Together, we can face this darkness and emerge victorious." There was a moment of silence, then a figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Eric, a seasoned warrior with a heart as fierce as his sword. "I will stand with you, Bjorn. For our village and for our future." Bjorn felt a surge of gratitude and nodded. "Thank you, Eric. Your strength and bravery will be a great asset." One by one, others followed Eric's lead. Inga, a skilled archer with eyes as sharp as her arrows. Sven, a blacksmith whose hands were as strong as his resolve. And Freya, a healer whose knowledge of herbs and potions had saved many lives. Each one brought their own unique skills and strengths, united by a common purpose. As the last volunteer stepped forward, Bjorn felt a swell of pride and hope. He looked around at the assembled group, a diverse band of villagers who were willing to risk everything for the safety of their home. "Thank you, all of you. Together, we will face the Draugr and end this curse once and for all." The days that followed were filled with preparations. The warriors trained tirelessly, honing their skills and learning to fight as a cohesive unit. Eric led them in combat drills, teaching them the tactics and strategies they would need to face the Draugr. Inga shared her knowledge of archery, showing them how to strike from a distance and cover their comrades. Sven crafted weapons and armor, ensuring that each warrior was well equipped for the battle ahead. And Freya prepared healing potions and salves, ready to tend to the wounded. Bjorn worked alongside them, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his friends and neighbors grow stronger and more confident. He saw the determination in their eyes, the fire that burned within them. They were not just villagers, they were warriors, ready to defend their home and their loved ones. One evening, as the sun set and cast a golden glow over the village, Bjorn gathered his allies around a crackling fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the uncertainty of the days ahead. Bjorn looked at each of them, feeling a deep sense of connection and camaraderie. "We have trained hard," he said, his voice carrying a note of solemnity. "But the true test lies ahead. The Draugr are unlike any enemy we have faced. They are relentless and driven by a dark curse. But we have something they do not, our unity, our courage, and our love for each other." Eric nodded, his jaw set in determination. "We will face them together, Bjorn. No matter what happens, we will stand by your side." Inga raised her bow, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "For the village. For our families." Sven pounded his fist against his chest, his voice a rumble of conviction. "For honor. For our ancestors." Freya held up a small vial of potion, her expression one of unwavering focus. "For life. For the future." Bjorn felt a lump rise in his throat, moved by the strength and bravery of his friends. "We will fight as one," he said, his voice steady. "And we will prevail." As the night wore on, the warriors shared stories and laughter, their spirits lifted by the bonds they had forged. They knew the road ahead would be perilous, but they also knew that they were not alone. Together, they were stronger than any curse, any darkness. In the early hours of the morning, Bjorn stood at the edge of the village, gazing out at the horizon. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Freya, her eyes filled with wisdom and warmth. "You have gathered a formidable group, Bjorn," she said softly. "They will be your strength and your shield." Bjorn nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. "Thank you, Freya. For everything." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but reassuring. "Remember, Bjorn, the power of the Draugr lies in their curse. But the power of your allies lies in their hearts. Trust in them, and trust in yourself." Bjorn watched as Freya walked away, her figure fading into the darkness. He felt a renewed sense of determination, a fire burning within him. The Draugr were a formidable foe, but with his friends by his side, he knew they could face any challenge. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Bjorn turned back to the village. The warriors were already gathering, their expressions resolute and ready. Bjorn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead, but also the strength of the bonds that had been forged. With a final, determined nod, he joined his allies, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, they would fight for their village, for their loved ones, and for the future. And no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them as one, united by their courage and their unwavering hope. The air was thick with an unsettling silence as Bjorn and his band of warriors approached the dark forest. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seemed to whisper secrets as the wind rustled through their branches. Bjorn felt a shiver run down his spine but pressed on, his determination unwavering. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of their training and courage. Inga, ever the scout, moved ahead silently, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the Draugr's lair. She paused, kneeling to inspect a cluster of disturbed earth. "Over here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tracks fresh ones." Bjorn nodded, his grip tightening around Mjolnir. The group followed Inga, their senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made their hearts race. They were venturing into the unknown, where the Draugr's darkness lay in wait. After what felt like hours, they came upon a clearing. At the center stood a large, ancient mound, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. The entrance, a gaping maw of darkness, seemed to beckon them with an ominous pull. "This is it," Eric said, his voice low but steady. "The Draugr's lair." Bjorn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission pressing down on him. He glanced at his comrades, each one ready and willing to face whatever horrors lay within. "Stay close," he instructed. "And stay vigilant." They entered the lair, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were damp and covered in strange, glowing runes that pulsed with an eerie light. Bjorn could feel the dark magic seeping from them, a testament to the Draugr's ancient power. Freya, carrying a torch, moved closer to the runes. "These symbols," she murmured, "they speak of a curse, a bond between the Draugr and this place. Its power is tied to these runes." Sven, ever practical, gripped his axe tightly. "Then we need to find the source of this power and destroy it." As they ventured deeper, the lair twisted and turned, a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive darkness seemed to close in around them. Bjorn could feel the fear creeping into his heart, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. The group halted, their breath catching in their throats. From the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes emerged, followed by the hulking form of a Draugr. Its rotting flesh and gleaming teeth were a stark reminder of the terror they faced. Bjorn stepped forward, Mjolnir at the ready. "This is what we've trained for," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling fear. "Stay together. We fight as one." The Draugr lunged, and the battle began. Eric and Sven flanked Bjorn, their weapons striking with practiced precision. Inga's arrows flew true, each one finding its mark. Freya stayed back, ready to heal any wounds, her potions and salves at the ready. Despite their training, the Draugr was relentless, its dark magic making it a formidable foe. But the warriors fought with everything they had, their bond and determination driving them forward. With a final, powerful swing, Bjorn brought Mjolnir down on the Draugr, shattering it into a cloud of dark mist. Breathing heavily, the group pressed on, their resolve unshaken. They knew that this was only the beginning, that the true source of the Draugr's power lay deeper within the lair. They moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. At last, they reached a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in the shadows. At the center stood an altar, covered in more glowing runes. The air hummed with dark energy, and Bjorn could feel the power radiating from the altar. This was the heart of the Draugr's lair, the source of its strength. Freya stepped forward, her eyes scanning the runes. "This is it," she said. "The source of the curse. If we can destroy it, we can weaken the Draugr." Eric and Sven moved to the altar, their weapons ready. But as they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a Draugr, larger and more terrifying than any they had faced. Its eyes burned with a malevolent fire, and its voice echoed with ancient power. "You dare enter my domain," it hissed. You will pay for your insolence. Bjorn stepped forward, his heart pounding. We will end this curse, and we will free our village from your terror. The Draugr laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. You are brave, but bravery will not save you. The battle that followed was fierce and brutal. The Draugr's dark magic filled the chamber, and the warriors fought with every ounce of strength they had. Bjorn could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him, the hopes and dreams of his village resting on his shoulders. But they fought as one, their bond unbreakable. Eric's strength, Inga's precision, Sven's determination, and Freya's wisdom all came together in a powerful force. With a final, desperate strike, Bjorn brought Mjolnir down on the altar, shattering it and sending a shockwave of light and energy through the chamber. The Draugr let out a terrible scream, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The dark magic that had filled the air dissipated, and the chamber fell silent. Breathing heavily, the warriors looked at each other, their faces filled with relief and triumph. We did it, Bjorn said, his voice filled with awe. We ended the curse. Freya smiled, her eyes shining with pride. We did it together. As they made their way out of the lair, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The air felt lighter, the oppressive darkness lifting. They had faced their fears, fought with everything they had, and emerged victorious. For the first time in what felt like forever, Bjorn felt a sense of peace. They had discovered the Draugr's lair, learned its secrets, and ended its terror. And as they walked back to their village, he knew that they had forged a bond that would never be broken, a bond that would protect their home and their loved ones for generations to come. The night was heavy with an eerie silence, the kind that clung to the skin and made every heartbeat feel like a thunderclap. Bjorn stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the darkness that lay ahead. He could sense the tension in his companions, each one readying themselves for the battle that would soon unfold. This was their first true test, their first confrontation with the Draugr. A cold wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down Bjorn's spine. He tightened his grip on Mjolnir, feeling the reassuring weight of the ancient weapon. He glanced at Eric, whose eyes were hard with determination, and then at Inga, who stood poised with her bow, her face a mask of concentration. Sven and Freya were close behind, each bracing for the inevitable clash. A faint sound broke the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Bjorn's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. They had trained for this. They were ready. From the shadows, the Draugr emerged, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The stench of decay wafted through the air, mingling with the cold, making it almost unbearable. The creature was taller than any man, its rotting flesh barely clinging to its bones, its presence a living nightmare. Bjorn took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady. Hold your ground. Remember our training. We fight as one. The Draugr let out a chilling laugh, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the forest. It moved with a speed that belied its decayed form, lunging at the group with a ferocity that took their breath away. Eric was the first to react, meeting the Draugr's attack head-on with a powerful swing of his sword. The blade connected, but the Draugr barely flinched, its dark magic absorbing the blow. Inga's arrows flew through the air, striking true, but the creature seemed impervious to their sting. Bjorn joined the fray, Mjolnir crackling with energy as he swung at the Draugr. The hammer struck the creature's chest, sending a shockwave through its body. The Draugr staggered, its eyes flaring with rage. It turned its attention to Bjorn, its claws outstretched, ready to tear him apart. Sven moved to Bjorn's side, his axe gleaming in the moonlight. With a mighty roar, he brought it down on the Draugr's arm, severing it with a sickening crunch. The creature let out a howl of pain, but it didn't stop. It fought on, driven by an unholy force. Freya stayed back, her hands glowing with healing light, ready to mend any wounds her comrades might sustain. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she kept her focus, knowing that their lives depended on her. The battle raged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. The Draugr was relentless, its attacks coming faster and harder. Bjorn could feel his strength waning, but he refused to give in. He fought with every ounce of his being, driven by the knowledge that the fate of his village rested on his shoulders. Eric let out a grunt of pain as the Draugr's claws raked across his chest, leaving deep, bloody gashes. Freya rushed to his side, her hands glowing as she worked to heal his wounds. "Stay strong, Eric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We need you." Bjorn saw the fear in her eyes, the worry for their friend. He turned his attention back to the Draugr, his resolve hardening. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let the Draugr win. With a primal scream, Bjorn charged at the Draugr, Mjolnir held high. The hammer glowed with a brilliant light, the runes etched into its surface flaring to life. He brought it down with all his might, aiming for the Draugr's head. The impact was deafening, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through the clearing. The Draugr let out a blood-curdling scream as Mjolnir crushed its skull, dark magic spilling from its body in a torrent of shadow. The creature staggered, its form flickering as if caught between worlds. "Now, together!" Bjorn shouted, his voice echoing with authority. Eric, Inga, Sven, and Freya moved as one, their attacks converging on the Draugr in a flurry of steel and magic. Eric's sword cut through the creature's torso, Inga's arrows pierced its heart, Sven's axe cleaved its legs, and Freya's healing light seared its wounds. The Draugr let out one final, anguished cry before collapsing to the ground. Its body disintegrated into ash, the dark magic that had sustained it dissipating into the night. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the last remnants of the Draugr's power faded away. Breathing heavily, Bjorn looked around at his comrades, their faces etched with exhaustion but also relief. They had faced the Draugr and emerged victorious. The first battle had been fought, and they had won. Freya moved to Eric's side, her hand still glowing as she finished healing his wounds. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle. Eric nodded, wincing slightly. "I'll live. Thanks to you." Inga retrieved her arrows, her hands shaking slightly. "That was intense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sven clapped Bjorn on the shoulder, his grin wide despite the blood and sweat on his face. "We did it, Bjorn. We faced the Draugr and won." Bjorn nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, we did. But this is just the beginning. There are more Draugr out there, more battles to be fought. But tonight, we've shown that we have the strength and the courage to face them." As they made their way back to the village, Bjorn felt a sense of pride and hope. They had taken their first step in the fight against the Draugr, and they had done it together. No matter what lay ahead, he knew that they would face it as one, united by their determination and their bond. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Bjorn felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle had just begun, but with his friends by his side, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The night was dark and cold, the air filled with a heavy, foreboding silence. The group huddled together, their breaths visible in the chill. They had faced the Draugr before, but tonight felt different. There was a weight in the air, a sense of impending doom that none of them could shake. They knew the risks, but they also knew they had no choice but to fight. Bjorn stood at the front, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. He could feel the tension in his comrades, each one bracing for the inevitable clash. Eric was beside him, his sword gleaming in the moonlight. Inga stood a little further back, her bow at the ready, while Sven and Freya brought up the rear, their faces set in grim determination. Without warning, the Draugr emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The creature moved with terrifying speed, its claws outstretched as it lunged at the group. Bjorn swung Mjolnir with all his might, the hammer connecting with the Draugr's chest and sending it staggering back. But the creature quickly recovered, its eyes locking onto Eric. "Stay together," Bjorn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let it divide us." The Draugr let out a blood-curdling roar and charged at Eric, its claws slashing through the air. Eric met the attack head-on, his sword slicing through the Draugr's flesh. The creature howled in pain but didn't falter, its eyes burning with rage. Inga's arrows flew through the air, striking the Draugr's back and momentarily slowing its advance. Sven and Freya moved in, their weapons ready to strike. But the Draugr was relentless, its attacks coming faster and harder. It seemed almost invincible, its dark magic fueling its every move. Suddenly, the Draugr turned its full fury on Eric, its claws tearing through his armor and flesh. Eric let out a cry of pain, staggering back as blood poured from his wounds. Freya rushed to his side, her hands glowing with healing light, but the Draugr was relentless. It struck again, its claws sinking deep into Eric's chest. "Eric!" Freya screamed, her voice filled with terror and despair. Bjorn's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to reach his friend, but the Draugr was between them, its eyes locked onto Eric with a predatory gleam. Eric tried to raise his sword, but his strength was fading fast. The Draugr's claws flashed again, and Eric fell to the ground, his eyes wide with pain and shock. "No!" Bjorn shouted, his voice breaking with anguish. He swung Mjolnir with all his might, the hammer crashing into the Draugr and sending it sprawling. But it was too late. Eric lay motionless on the ground, his life slipping away with every passing second. Freya knelt beside Eric, tears streaming down her face as she tried desperately to heal his wounds. "Stay with us, Eric," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Please, don't leave us." Eric's eyes met hers, his gaze filled with sorrow and regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I tried to protect you all." Bjorn fell to his knees beside his fallen friend, his heart breaking as he watched the light fade from Eric's eyes. "You were brave, Eric," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You fought with honor. We'll never forget you." The Draugr let out a final, haunting scream before vanishing into the darkness, its form dissolving into shadow. The clearing fell silent, the only sound the soft sobs of Freya as she cradled Eric's lifeless body. Inga lowered her bow, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He was so strong," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "I can't believe he's gone." Sven's face was pale, his eyes filled with grief. "We've lost a true warrior," he said, his voice trembling. "But we can't let his sacrifice be in vain. We have to keep fighting, for Eric's sake." Bjorn nodded, his heart heavy with loss. "We will," he said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "We'll honor Eric's memory by finishing what we started. We'll defeat the Draugr, no matter what it takes." Freya looked up, her face streaked with tears but her eyes filled with determination. "For Eric," she said, her voice steady. "We'll make sure his sacrifice means something." As they stood together in the cold, dark night, a sense of unity and resolve settled over the group. They had lost a friend, a brother, a hero. But they would not let his death be in vain. They would fight on, fueled by their love for Eric and their shared determination to rid their world of the Draugr's evil. And as they prepared to move forward, each one silently vowed to carry Eric's memory with them, to honor his bravery and his sacrifice. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and strength, knowing that Eric was with them in spirit, guiding their every step. The night was still and quiet, but in their hearts, the fire of determination burned brighter than ever. They would not rest until the Draugr was defeated, until Eric's sacrifice was avenged. They were warriors, united by their grief and their resolve, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The night was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that set the villagers on edge. Mothers hushed their children, and even the bravest warriors felt a chill down their spines. The memory of Eric's sacrifice was still fresh, a raw wound that hadn't yet begun to heal. The villagers knew the Draugr would strike again. It was not a question of if, but when. Bjorn stood watch at the edge of the village, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. He could feel the weight of his responsibility, the burden of protecting the people he loved. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. He gripped Mjolnir tightly, his knuckles white from the pressure. Without warning, a bone-chilling howl pierced the silence, sending shivers down Bjorn's spine. The Draugr had returned, and this time it brought chaos with it. Dark shapes emerged from the shadows, moving with terrifying speed. The Draugr's minions, twisted and malevolent, charged towards the village with a ferocity that took Bjorn's breath away. Attack! Bjorn shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The village sprang to life, warriors grabbing their weapons and rushing to defend their home. Inga notched an arrow, her eyes focused and determined. Sven and Freya took their positions, ready to face the onslaught. The Draugr led the charge, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It moved with a speed and grace that belied its decayed form, its claws slicing through the air. The first clash was brutal, the sound of metal on bone echoing through the village. Bjorn swung Mjolnir with all his might, but the Draugr was relentless, its dark magic fueling its every move. Inga's arrows flew through the air, each one finding its mark, but the Draugr seemed impervious to pain. Sven's axe cleaved through the minions, his roars of defiance mingling with the screams of the fallen. Freya moved between the warriors, her healing light a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. The Draugr let out a terrifying roar, its claws tearing through a line of defenders. The village was in chaos, fires breaking out as the battle raged on. Bjorn could feel his strength waning, but he refused to give in. He fought with every ounce of his being, driven by the memory of Eric's sacrifice and the need to protect his people. A sudden, piercing scream cut through the noise. Bjorn turned to see a young mother, her child clutched in her arms, cornered by one of the Draugr's minions. His heart pounded as he raced towards them, Mjolnir glowing with a fierce light. With a mighty swing, he sent the creature flying, its body disintegrating into ash. "Get to safety!" Bjorn shouted, his voice hoarse with effort. The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face as she fled with her child. Bjorn turned back to the battle, his eyes burning with determination. He couldn't let the Draugr win. He wouldn't. The night wore on, each moment a struggle for survival. The Draugr was everywhere, its minions wreaking havoc at every turn. The village burned, the flames casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. But the villagers fought on, their spirit unbroken despite the odds. Bjorn found himself face to face with the Draugr once more, its eyes locking onto his with a predatory gleam. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched, but Bjorn was ready. He swung Mjolnir with all his might, the hammer connecting with the Draugr's skull. The impact sent a shockwave through the creature, but it didn't fall. It snarled, its eyes blazing with fury. "You will not win," Bjorn growled, his voice filled with defiance. "We will not fall to your darkness." The Draugr let out a chilling laugh, its breath hot and rancid. "You are strong, Bjorn, but you cannot defeat me. I will destroy everything you love, and there is nothing you can do to stop me." Bjorn's heart pounded with rage and fear, but he refused to back down. He swung Mjolnir again and again, each blow fueled by his determination to protect his village. The Draugr fought back with equal ferocity, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. As the battle raged on, Bjorn's strength began to fade. He could feel his body weakening, the weight of Mjolnir growing heavier with each passing moment. But he couldn't give up. He couldn't let the Draugr win. "Bjorn!" Inga's voice rang out through the chaos, her arrows flying towards the Draugr with deadly accuracy. Sven and Freya joined the fray, their weapons striking the creature from all sides. Together, they fought with a unity born of desperation and hope. The Draugr let out a howl of rage as it was pushed back, its dark magic faltering under the combined assault. Bjorn saw his chance and swung Mjolnir with all his remaining strength, the hammer connecting with the Draugr's chest in a blinding flash of light. The creature let out a final, agonized scream before disintegrating into ash, its dark magic dissipating into the night. The village fell silent, the only sound the crackling of flames and the labored breathing of the survivors. Bjorn fell to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. The battle was won, but the cost was great. The village lay in ruins, the fires casting long shadows over the devastation. But they had survived. They had fought back the darkness and emerged victorious. Freya knelt beside Bjorn, her healing light soothing his wounds. "We did it, Bjorn," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "We survived." Bjorn nodded, his heart heavy with the loss and destruction. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But at what cost?" As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the villagers began to gather, their faces etched with grief and determination. They had lost much, but they had also gained something invaluable. They had proven that they could stand together, fight together, and survive. And as they began the arduous task of rebuilding, Bjorn felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced the Draugr's wrath and lived to tell the tale. They were stronger together, united by their shared struggle and their unbreakable spirit. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Draugr was defeated, but its darkness still lingered, a shadow over their hearts. But they would fight on, fueled by the memory of those they had lost and the hope for a brighter future. They were warriors, survivors, and they would not be broken. The village lay in shambles, the echoes of battle still ringing in the air. Bjorn wandered through the ruins, his heart heavy with grief and weariness. The loss of friends and the destruction of their home weighed on him like a leaden shroud. As he walked, he stumbled upon a small, untouched corner of the village, the old library, which had miraculously escaped the worst of the devastation. Driven by a flicker of hope, Bjorn pushed open the door and stepped inside. The library, though dusty and dark, held a wealth of knowledge. Ancient scrolls and leather-bound books lined the shelves, their spines cracked and worn. He made his way through the aisles, his fingers brushing against the faded titles. The quiet of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, offering a brief respite from the turmoil. Bjorn's eyes fell upon a small, leather-bound tome tucked away on a high shelf. It was different from the others, its cover adorned with intricate symbols that glimmered faintly in the dim light. He carefully took it down and blew off the dust, revealing a title that sent a shiver down his spine, The Secrets of the Undying. With trembling hands, Bjorn opened the book and began to read. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As he flipped through the chapters, he came across passages describing the Draugr's origins and their insatiable hunger for vengeance. His heart raced as he read about their powers and their weaknesses, hoping for a glimmer of hope amidst the grim details. One passage, in particular, caught his eye. It spoke of a hidden vulnerability in the Draugr, a weakness that could be exploited to defeat them. The ancient text described a rare substance that, when used correctly, could weaken the Draugr's dark magic and render them vulnerable. The substance was known as solstitium, a crystal formed from the essence of sunlight. Bjorn's mind raced as he absorbed the information. The Draugr had been nearly unstoppable in their previous encounters, their dark magic making them nearly impervious to conventional attacks. But if this solstitium could weaken their powers, it might be the key to finally defeating them. The book also described where solstitium could be found, hidden in a cave deep within the misty mountains. The journey would be perilous, fraught with dangers and unknowns. But Bjorn felt a surge of determination. If there was even a chance that this substance could help them, he had to try. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm, feeling a new sense of purpose. The village was still in ruins, and their enemies were not vanquished. But this new knowledge gave him hope, a sliver of light in the encroaching darkness. He needed to gather his allies, share this newfound information, and prepare for the dangerous quest ahead. The sun was beginning to set as Bjorn stepped outside the library, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. He made his way to the central square where the survivors were gathered, their faces tired but resolute. They looked up as he approached, their eyes reflecting a mix of hope and exhaustion. "We've found something," Bjorn said, his voice steady despite the weariness that weighed on him. "A potential weakness in the Draugr." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their curiosity piqued. Bjorn held up the book, his fingers gripping it tightly. "There's a substance called solstitium," he explained. "It's a crystal formed from sunlight, and it's said to weaken the Draugr's dark magic. It's our best chance to defeat them once and for all." The villagers exchanged glances, their faces reflecting both hope and doubt. Inga stepped forward, her eyes wide with concern. "Where do we find this solstitium?" she asked. "It's hidden in a cave in the misty mountains," Bjorn replied. "The journey will be dangerous, and we don't know what we'll face along the way. But it's our best shot." Freya nodded, her expression determined. "Then we prepare for the journey." We can't waste any time. The group quickly organized, gathering supplies and preparing for the arduous trek. The weight of their mission settled heavily on Bjorn's shoulders, but he felt a flicker of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. They had a chance, a real chance, to turn the tide in their favor. As night fell over the village, Bjorn stood at the edge of the camp, staring out at the dark horizon. The misty mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist and mystery. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was ready to face it. He glanced at the book once more, its pages holding the promise of a brighter future. The solstitium might be their only hope, and he was determined to see this quest through, no matter the cost. The battle against the Draugr was far from over, but with this newfound knowledge, they had a fighting chance. The night was cold and silent, but within the hearts of Bjorn and his allies, a fire of hope burned brightly. They had faced darkness before, and they would face it again. But this time, they carried with them a glimmer of light, a chance to defeat their enemies and reclaim their future. The forge roared with life, its flames casting a fierce glow over the gathered crowd. The clang of the hammer against the anvil rang out like a war drum, each strike echoing through the night air. The legendary weapon was taking shape, a gleaming promise of hope forged in the heart of fire. Bjorn watched intently, his heart pounding with anticipation. The weapon, a magnificent sword with a blade forged from rare metals, had been meticulously crafted from the finest materials. It was said to hold immense power, capable of turning the tide against the Draugr. Now, as the final touches were being applied, the excitement in the forge was palpable. The blacksmith, an old man with a face lined by age and experience, worked with a reverence that spoke of centuries of tradition. His hands moved with practiced precision, shaping the weapon with care and skill. Every swing of the hammer, every stroke of the file, seemed to be guided by the wisdom of the ages. The weapon's blade began to shimmer with an ethereal light, a sign of its growing power. Nearby, the village seer stood with her eyes closed, murmuring ancient incantations. Her voice, soft and melodic, wove a tapestry of blessings and protection over the weapon. The air crackled with energy as her words took hold, imbuing the sword with magical properties that would enhance its power against the Draugr. Bjorn's thoughts were a whirlwind of hope and fear. The Draugr had wreaked havoc on his village, leaving destruction and sorrow in their wake. This weapon was their last, best chance to confront the darkness and restore peace. He could almost feel the weight of the weapon's potential, the hope it represented. The blacksmith's final strike was met with a bright flash, the forge's flames momentarily dimming. The weapon was complete. The old man held it up for everyone to see, its blade gleaming with a radiant light. It was more beautiful than Bjorn had imagined, elegant yet formidable, a symbol of their strength and resolve. The seer stepped forward, her eyes now open, filled with a solemn determination. She held out her hands, and the sword was gently placed into them. With a graceful movement, she began the ancient ritual of blessing. Her voice was steady, each word carrying a weight of meaning and power. The air around them seemed to hum with a divine energy, a sign that the gods were watching and approving. As the blessing continued, the sword's light grew brighter, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. The villagers watched in awe, their faces illuminated by the sword's glow. For a moment, the pain and exhaustion of the recent battles seemed to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and unity. Bjorn stepped forward, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He reached out and touched the sword, feeling a surge of warmth and strength. The weapon felt alive in his hands, its power a tangible force that seemed to resonate with his very soul. It was as if the gods themselves had poured their blessings into it, making it a vessel of their will. The seer finished the ritual and stepped back, her face serene but tired. She looked at Bjorn, her gaze filled with a quiet confidence. "This sword is more than just a weapon," she said softly. "It is a symbol of your courage and determination. Use it wisely, and it will guide you to victory." Bjorn nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We will not let you down." The blacksmith, though weary, smiled with satisfaction. "May the gods watch over you," he said. "This sword is now a part of your destiny." Carry it with honor. As the crowd began to disperse, Bjorn held the sword up to the sky, its light cutting through the darkness. He could almost hear the whispers of the gods, their approval mingling with the roar of the forge's flames. The weapon was ready, blessed by the gods, and forged with hope. With a renewed sense of purpose, Bjorn gathered his allies, their faces reflecting the same determination that burned in his heart. They had faced countless challenges, but now they had a weapon that could change everything. The time had come to confront the Draugr once more, to face the darkness with a symbol of their strength and unity. As they prepared for the battle ahead, Bjorn felt a surge of hope and courage. The legendary weapon, with its divine blessing and radiant light, was more than just a tool. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder of their resilience and their fight for a better future. The gods had given them a chance, and they would seize it with all their might. The village, though scarred and battered, stood ready. The sword was a promise of victory, a testament to their unyielding spirit. With the weapon in hand and the blessings of the gods upon them, Bjorn and his allies prepared to face the Draugr, ready to fight for their home and their future. The air was thick with tension as the group gathered around the flickering light of a small campfire. The night was cold and still, the shadows of the surrounding forest stretching long and eerie. Bjorn, with the newly forged weapon strapped to his back, stood at the head of the group, his face etched with determination. The stakes had never been higher, and every decision they made could mean the difference between life and death. The Draugr had become a constant threat, their malevolent presence hanging over the village like a dark cloud. Now, with the legendary weapon ready, it was time to turn the tables. But first, they needed a plan to lure the Draugr into a trap, a plan that would exploit their weaknesses and give them the upper hand. Bjorn's closest allies, including Freya, Inga, and a few seasoned warriors, gathered around a makeshift map spread out on the ground. The map, drawn with charcoal and scraps of paper, depicted the village and the surrounding terrain. It was rough and crude, but served its purpose well. Freya, her eyes sharp with focus, pointed to a spot on the map. We need to draw them out of their lair. If we can get them to follow a decoy, we can lead them into the ambush we've set up. Inga nodded in agreement, her brow furrowed in thought. The Draugr are cunning. They won't be easily fooled. We'll need to use their own tactics against them. We should create a distraction that will lure them away from their stronghold. The group fell silent as Bjorn studied the map. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, their hopes and fears hanging in the balance. The plan had to be perfect. If it failed, the Draugr would destroy everything they had fought so hard to protect. Bjorn traced a path with his finger, his voice steady but laced with urgency. We'll use the village as our bait. We can set up a false camp with supplies and fires, making it look like a vulnerable target. The Draugr will see it and think it's an easy prey. He looked up, meeting the eyes of each of his comrades. Freya and Inga, you'll be in charge of setting up the decoy. Make sure it's convincing, enough to draw the Draugr's attention away from their lair. Use any supplies you can find and make it look like a real, bustling camp. Freya gave a determined nod. We'll do it. The Draugr won't know what hit them. Bjorn turned to the other warriors, their faces grim and resolute. The rest of us will be in position to ambush them. We'll set up traps and barricades along the path they're likely to take. When they fall for the decoy, we'll spring the trap and hit them with everything we've got. The warriors' eyes shone with a fierce resolve. They knew the risks, but were ready to face them head-on. Each one of them had lost something to the Draugr, their homes, their loved ones, their peace. This battle was personal, and they were determined to see it through. Inga spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear that lurked behind her words. We should also prepare signals for when the Draugr are approaching. It's crucial that we know when they're coming so we can coordinate our attack. Bjorn nodded. Good idea. We'll use fires and flares to signal. When you see the signal, make sure everyone is in position. We need to be precise and ready for anything. As the plans took shape, the group's focus sharpened. The reality of the battle ahead was daunting, but the sight of their comrades working together filled Bjorn with a deep sense of hope. They were fighting not just for survival but for a future free from fear and destruction. Hours passed as the group finalized their plan, their voices hushed and intense. The fires of the camp crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on their faces. The cold night air was a stark contrast to the heat of their determination. Each detail was discussed, every possible complication considered. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the plan was set. The group broke up into their respective roles, each person driven by a shared sense of purpose. Freya and Inga set off to create the decoy camp, their movements precise and quick. The warriors took their positions along the path, their hearts racing with the anticipation of the upcoming confrontation. Bjorn stood alone for a moment, looking out over the landscape. The village, once a place of comfort and safety, was now a battlefield. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that their plan would succeed and that the darkness that had plagued their lives would finally be driven away. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light over the land, Bjorn felt a renewed sense of determination. The battle plan was in motion, and all they had to do now was wait. The Draugr would come, drawn by the lure of the decoy, and when they did, the trap would be set. The weight of the upcoming battle pressed heavily on Bjorn's shoulders, but he knew they had done everything possible to prepare. With the legendary weapon at their side and a plan in place, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The time for action was near, and the hope for victory burned brightly in their hearts. The forest was eerily silent, a tense hush settling over the trees like a shroud. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig seemed amplified, a haunting prelude to the chaos that was about to unfold. The warriors crouched in their hidden positions, their breaths coming in short, anxious bursts. The tension was so thick it felt almost palpable, a living thing that wrapped around them. Bjorn and his team had set up the ambush with meticulous care. The forest path, normally a quiet route through the trees, had been transformed into a deadly trap. Hidden pits, sharpened stakes, and concealed barriers lay in wait for the unsuspecting Draugr. The warriors were positioned in the underbrush, their eyes scanning the dimly lit path, weapons at the ready. In the distance, the faint sound of footsteps began to emerge from the shadows. The Draugr, lured by the decoy camp's false lights and tempting supplies, were making their way into the trap. Each step they took seemed to echo with the promise of destruction, the forest now a battlefield poised on the edge of violence. Bjorn's heart pounded in his chest as he tightened his grip on his sword. He glanced at his comrades, their faces a mix of determination and fear. They had trained for this moment, prepared for every possible outcome. But as the Draugr drew closer, the reality of the battle weighed heavily on their shoulders. The first Draugr appeared, emerging from the shadows with a guttural growl. Their twisted forms moved with an unnatural grace, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. The sight of them sent a chill down Bjorn's spine, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was their chance to strike, to end the terror that had plagued their village. With a sharp signal from Bjorn, the ambush was sprung. The forest erupted into chaos as hidden traps were triggered. Pits opened beneath the Draugr, causing them to fall into darkness, their cries of surprise and anger mingling with the sounds of battle. The warriors emerged from their hiding places, charging forward with fierce cries. The clash of weapons and the roars of the Draugr filled the forest, a cacophony of violence and desperation. Bjorn swung his sword with all his might, each blow a desperate attempt to protect his home and his people. The legendary weapon, now a symbol of their hope, cut through the darkness with a blazing light, its power a beacon in the chaos. Freya and Inga fought alongside him, their movements synchronized and precise. Freya's bow sang through the air, each arrow finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Inga wielded her axe with a fierce intensity, her every swing a testament to her determination. They fought with a bravery born from their love for their village and their will to see this battle through. Despite their efforts, the Draugr were relentless. Their numbers seemed endless, their strength and ferocity a formidable challenge. The warriors fought with everything they had, their strength and resolve tested with every passing moment. The forest was alive with the sounds of combat, the air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. Bjorn's sword glowed with a fierce light as he battled a particularly powerful Draugr. The creature's eyes burned with a malevolent fire, its twisted form a horrifying sight. Bjorn's strikes were powerful, but the Draugr's resilience was terrifying. Every blow he landed seemed to barely slow it down, its strength and determination unyielding. As the battle raged on, Bjorn saw one of his comrades fall, a warrior who had fought bravely beside him. The sight of their fallen friend, their lifeless body lying amidst the chaos, was a crushing blow. The pain of loss cut through Bjorn's resolve, a stark reminder of the high cost of their fight. But there was no time to mourn. The battle was far from over, and they had to press on. The ambush, though initially successful, was turning into a desperate struggle. The Draugr were fighting back with a viciousness that threatened to overwhelm them. Bjorn could see the strain on his allies' faces, their exhaustion evident as they fought to hold their ground. Each moment was a battle against the encroaching darkness, their hope flickering like a fragile flame in the midst of the storm. In the heart of the conflict, Bjorn found a moment of clarity. The legendary weapon, though powerful, was not enough on its own. It was their unity, their determination, and their bravery that would turn the tide. With a fierce shout, he rallied his comrades, urging them to hold their ground and push back against the Draugr. The warriors, fueled by a shared resolve, fought with renewed vigor. They pressed forward, their strikes more precise, their movements more coordinated. The tide of battle began to shift, the Draugr's advance slowing as the warriors' determination drove them back. The forest, once a place of terror, became a testament to their courage and strength. As the battle drew to a close, the forest was littered with the remnants of the fight. The Draugr were retreating, their once formidable advance now a desperate scramble to escape the onslaught. The warriors stood amidst the aftermath, their bodies weary and their spirits bruised but unbroken. Bjorn looked around at his comrades, their faces marked by the struggle but also by the fierce pride of victory. The ambush had been a hard-fought battle, and though the cost had been high, they had achieved their goal. The Draugr had been driven back, their plans thwarted by the bravery and determination of those who refused to give in. The forest, now quiet once more, held the echoes of the battle in its depths. It was a place of both victory and loss, a reminder of the courage it took to stand against the darkness. As Bjorn and his allies regrouped, they knew the fight was not yet over. But in that moment, amidst the ruins of their ambush, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that they could overcome the darkness and reclaim their lives. The night was heavy with an unsettling stillness, a silence that seemed to press down on the village like an invisible weight. The battle had left scars on the land and the people, but something even darker now loomed. As the last echoes of the fight faded, a cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. Bjorn and his allies had gathered in the village square, their faces etched with exhaustion and worry. The recent battle had been brutal, but they were about to face something far more terrifying. The Draugr, their relentless enemy, had been driven back but not defeated. Now, it seemed to be preparing for its final, devastating act. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled with a deep, resonant growl. The villagers exchanged fearful glances as an unnatural chill settled over the area. Shadows flickered in the moonlight, stretching and twisting in grotesque patterns. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a dark energy that prickled their skin. With a sickening crack, the earth split open near the center of the village. From the fissure, a dark mist began to rise, swirling in a way that seemed almost alive. The mist coiled and writhed, its shape shifting like a living nightmare. The villagers watched in horror as the mist began to take form, revealing the true horror of the Draugr. From the swirling darkness emerged a figure unlike anything they had seen before. It was a monstrosity of the darkest nightmares, a grotesque mockery of life itself. The Draugr's true form was colossal and horrifying. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a sickly, mottled gray, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent light, their gaze piercing through the gloom with an almost sentient hunger. The creature's limbs were long and twisted, ending in claws that seemed capable of tearing through flesh and bone with ease. Its mouth was a gaping maw of jagged teeth, ever shifting and dripping with an otherworldly saliva that hissed as it touched the ground. As the Draugr moved, the ground beneath it seemed to wither and die, as if the very essence of life was being drained away. The villagers' fear was palpable, a suffocating cloud that hung over them as they faced this horrifying revelation. Their previous encounters with the Draugr had been terrifying, but this was something far worse. The true form of the Draugr was a monster born from pure darkness, an entity that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Bjorn's heart raced as he looked upon the creature. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape from this abomination. But he could not. The village, the people he cared for, depended on him. His grip tightened around his sword, the legendary weapon now feeling like a fragile hope against the monstrous reality before him. His allies stood beside him, their faces a mix of terror and determination. Freya's eyes were wide with shock, but her hands remained steady on her bow. Inga, though visibly shaken, tightened her grip on her axe, her jaw set in grim resolve. Together, they had faced many challenges, but this was different. The Draugr's true form was a symbol of the very darkness they were fighting against, a darkness that seemed almost invincible. The Draugr roared, a sound that was more of a guttural, bone-chilling growl than a roar. It shook the very air, causing the village buildings to tremble and the villagers to cry out in fear. The sheer force of the Draugr's presence was overwhelming, a tangible force that pressed down on their spirits. The creature began to advance, its massive form moving with a horrifying grace. Each step seemed to echo with the promise of destruction, the very earth beneath it cracking and groaning in protest. As it moved, its eyes locked onto Bjorn and his allies, the malevolent gaze filled with a cold, calculating hunger. The villagers, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the true horror of the Draugr unfolded before them. The creature was not just a physical threat, it was a living embodiment of their deepest fears, a nightmare made flesh. Its presence seemed to drain the warmth and light from the world, leaving only a cold, empty darkness in its wake. Bjorn knew that they had no choice but to confront this terror head-on. The legendary weapon they had forged was their last hope, their final chance to push back against the darkness. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his heart pounding with both fear and determination. His allies followed, their faces set in grim resolve as they prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of their village. As the Draugr drew closer, its eyes blazing with a cruel, predatory light, the air was filled with a heavy silence. The moment was a frozen tableau of fear and bravery, a stark contrast between the darkness that loomed and the flickering hope that still burned within them. In that heart-stopping moment, Bjorn could see the fear in his allies' eyes, the same fear that mirrored his own. But there was something else there as well, an unspoken resolve, a determination to fight against the overwhelming darkness. The Draugr's true form was a terrifying sight, but it also served as a reminder of why they had to fight. For their village, for their loved ones, and for the hope that light could still prevail against the darkest of evils. The confrontation with the Draugr was more than a battle, it was a struggle against the very essence of fear and despair. The true form of the Draugr was a chilling revelation, but it also ignited a fierce determination in Bjorn and his allies. They stood united, ready to face the darkness with every ounce of courage they had left, knowing that the fate of their world hung in the balance. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, ghostly light over the village as the night descended into an uneasy calm. The final battle was upon them. The air crackled with tension, the silence heavy and oppressive, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation. Bjorn and his brave allies stood together in the village square, their faces set in grim determination, their hearts pounding with both fear and resolve. The Draugr, in all its horrifying glory, loomed in the distance. Its monstrous form moved with a dreadful, purposeful stride, each step causing the earth to shiver. The creature was a living nightmare, its presence an almost palpable force of darkness. The village, once a haven of warmth and safety, now felt like a stage for the ultimate confrontation between hope and despair. Bjorn's eyes scanned his comrades, each one a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Freya, her bow slung over her shoulder, was preparing her arrows with steady hands, her face a mask of fierce determination. Inga, her axe gripped tightly, was readying herself for the brutal fight to come, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and unyielding resolve. Their faces were illuminated by the flickering light of torches, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with the uncertainty of the moment. The legendary weapon, now fully forged and blessed, lay at Bjorn's side. It was a beacon of hope amidst the darkness, its very presence a reminder of their last chance to drive back the terror that threatened to consume them all. The weapon's blade glinted in the moonlight, a sharp, unyielding line of steel that seemed to promise a glimmer of hope against the encroaching night. As the Draugr drew closer, its horrifying form more clearly visible in the moonlight, a chill ran down Bjorn's spine. The monster's eyes, cold and malevolent, locked onto him, a gaze filled with an unspoken challenge. It was as if the Draugr knew that this battle would be the final test, the ultimate confrontation between the forces of light and darkness. The villagers who had managed to stay hidden in their homes watched in terrified silence, their hopes pinned on the few brave souls who stood ready to face the nightmare. The village square, once a place of communal warmth, had become the stage for a battle that would decide their fate. Bjorn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his responsibility pressing heavily upon him. The fear was palpable, a gnawing sensation that threatened to undermine his resolve. But he could not afford to falter. The lives of his friends, his family, and his entire village depended on the success of this final stand. With a firm grip on the legendary weapon, he turned to his allies, their faces resolute despite the fear that shone in their eyes. Tonight, we fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has ever called this place home, Bjorn's voice rang out, steady and full of conviction. We face this darkness together, and we will not let it claim our lives or our land. His words, though simple, carried a weight of truth that bolstered their spirits. Each ally nodded, a silent pledge of their unwavering commitment. They took their positions, their eyes fixed on the advancing Draugr. The moment of truth had arrived. With a deafening roar, the Draugr charged, its enormous form a living wave of terror. Bjorn and his allies met the onslaught with a fierce determination. Freya's arrows flew with deadly precision, each one striking the Draugr's hide with a burst of red light. Inga swung her axe with all her might, her strikes landing with a force that shook the very ground. Bjorn, wielding the legendary weapon, moved with a focused intensity, each swing of the blade a desperate attempt to turn the tide of battle. The clash was fierce and unrelenting. The Draugr, though powerful, was not invincible. Each strike from the heroes chipped away at its monstrous form, the legendary weapon cutting through its defenses. The battle was a brutal dance of survival, every moment fraught with peril. The Draugr's roars of fury filled the air, mingling with the cries of the brave fighters and the distant wails of the village's terrified inhabitants. As the fight raged on, the struggle against the darkness became a test of endurance and willpower. Bjorn could feel his strength waning, the weight of the legendary weapon growing heavier with each swing. But he pressed on, fueled by the thought of what was at stake. The Draugr's attacks were relentless, but every time it seemed to gain the upper hand, the combined strength of Bjorn and his allies pushed it back. The final stand was not just a battle, it was a battle for hope. Each swing of the blade, each arrow shot, and each swing of the axe was a defiant shout against the encroaching darkness. The air was filled with the scent of sweat and blood, a harsh reminder of the cost of their struggle. But through it all, Bjorn and his allies fought with a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. As the battle reached its climax, Bjorn found himself face to face with the Draugr's terrible gaze once more. The monster's eyes were filled with a chilling, relentless malice, but Bjorn's resolve was unwavering. With a final, mighty swing, he drove the legendary weapon into the heart of the Draugr. The impact was explosive, a burst of light and energy that seemed to push back the very shadows. The Draugr let out a final, earth-shattering roar, its monstrous form convulsing as the power of the weapon took hold. The darkness that had enveloped the village began to recede, the chilling presence of the Draugr fading into the night. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. The village lay in ruins, and the surviving villagers emerged from their hiding places, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and sorrow. In the aftermath, as the first light of dawn began to break through the darkness, Bjorn and his allies stood amidst the wreckage, their faces marked by exhaustion and triumph. The final stand had been a fierce and brutal confrontation, but they had emerged victorious. The darkness had been pushed back, but the scars of the battle would remain as a reminder of the struggle they had faced. The final stand had been more than just a battle, it had been a testament to the courage and resilience of those who refused to give in to fear. The village, though scarred, had survived, and the hope for a brighter future still burned brightly in the hearts of those who had fought so valiantly. As the night shrouded the village in an eerie darkness, hope seemed like a flickering candle about to be snuffed out. But then, a sudden, brilliant light broke through the gloom, casting a stark contrast against the encroaching shadows. The legendary weapon, long awaited and steeped in myths, was finally in the hands of the one who needed it most. The weapon, an ancient blade forged from both legend and necessity, pulsed with a strange, almost palpable energy. Bjorn, gripping it with both hands, could feel its power thrumming like a heartbeat against his own. The weapon's blade, now glowing with an intense, golden light, was a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. It was as if the weapon had its own heartbeat, resonating with the very essence of the struggle before them. The Draugr, with its monstrous form, seemed momentarily stunned by the weapon's glow. Its grotesque eyes, filled with a mix of anger and confusion, fixed on Bjorn. The air was thick with tension, each breath feeling heavier than the last as the battle reached a critical point. Bjorn's heart pounded, matching the rhythm of the weapon's pulse, as he prepared for the final confrontation. With a deep breath, Bjorn raised the legendary weapon high. The light it emitted cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating the battlefield in a brilliant, blinding glow. The Draugr recoiled, its monstrous form twisting and thrashing in response to the sudden burst of power. The shadows around it seemed to writhe and shrink, pushed back by the weapon's overwhelming light. The weapon's power was not just a physical force, but seemed to carry an ancient magic, a purity of purpose that repelled the darkness. As Bjorn swung the blade, the weapon unleashed a surge of energy that struck the Draugr with a force that was both beautiful and terrifying. A wave of light and power cascaded from the blade, striking the Draugr with an almost divine fury. The impact was explosive. The air itself seemed to shudder as the weapon's power collided with the Draugr's dark form. A brilliant explosion of light erupted, pushing back the shadows and sending tremors through the ground. The Draugr's roar of rage and pain echoed across the battlefield, a guttural sound that spoke of ancient torment and fury. Bjorn could barely see through the brilliance of the weapon's light, but he felt its impact with every fiber of his being. The power coursed through him, a rush of energy that fueled his every movement. The weapon, now fully awakened, seemed to have a will of its own, guiding Bjorn's strikes with precision and strength that seemed beyond human. Each swing of the blade unleashed a torrent of light that seemed to sear through the Draugr's dark form. The once menacing creature, now visibly weakened by the weapon's power, writhed in agony as the light continued to pour over it. The shadows that had once protected it now seemed to be devouring it, unraveling the darkness that had long held the village in its grip. The villagers, watching from a safe distance, were spellbound by the sight. They saw the blinding light and felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since the Draugr's terror had begun. The light from the weapon was more than just a physical force, it was a symbol of their fight against the darkness, a beacon of hope that promised an end to their suffering. As the battle raged on, the weapon's power showed no sign of waning. With each strike, it drove the Draugr back, pushing it to the brink of defeat. The once unstoppable force of darkness was being pushed back, its form unraveling under the relentless assault of light and power. The legendary weapon, with its ancient magic and pure light, was the turning point in the battle. The Draugr's once formidable presence was now faltering, its monstrous form shrinking under the weight of the weapon's power. The shadows that had cloaked it were now fading, driven away by the relentless brilliance of the blade. Bjorn's exhaustion was palpable, but so was his determination. The weapon's power was a force that seemed to drive him forward, even as his own strength waned. The light from the blade seemed to infuse him with a sense of purpose, a driving force that kept him moving despite the pain and fatigue. Each swing of the weapon was a testament to his resolve, a final, desperate push to end the terror that had gripped his village. As the weapon's power reached its zenith, the Draugr let out one final, despairing roar. The light from the blade intensified, flooding the battlefield with a brilliance that seemed to banish the darkness once and for all. The shadows around the Draugr dissipated, and the monstrous form that had once been so fearsome began to dissolve into nothingness. In the final moments of the battle, as the weapon's light reached its peak, the Draugr was engulfed by a searing wave of energy. The darkness that had once seemed so impenetrable was finally driven back, vanquished by the pure, radiant force of the legendary weapon. The weapon's power had done what nothing else could. It had broken the grip of the shadows and restored hope to a village on the brink of despair. The night was still, the silence broken only by the fading echoes of the battle. The weapon's light slowly dimmed, leaving behind a sense of profound relief and triumph. Bjorn stood amidst the aftermath, the legendary weapon still in his hand, its power spent but its purpose fulfilled. The village, though scarred, had survived, and the darkness had been pushed back by a light that had proven stronger than the shadows. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with gentle hues of orange and pink. The once ominous shadows that had plagued the village were now fading into memory. The battle had been won, and the Draugr, that ancient terror, lay vanquished, reduced to nothing more than a fading echo of darkness. But as the sun's rays touched the scorched earth, the true weight of victory began to sink in. The battlefield was strewn with the remnants of a fierce struggle. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the bitter tang of blood. Where the battle had raged, silence now held its sway. The village, though saved from the Draugr's clutches, was left scarred and broken. Houses were reduced to rubble, fields were burned and trampled, and the once vibrant village square now lay silent, save for the occasional moan of the injured. Bjorn, the warrior who had led the fight, stood at the edge of the battlefield, his body trembling from exhaustion. The legendary weapon that had been his beacon of hope now lay heavy in his hand, its once glowing blade dark and dulled. The weapon had fulfilled its purpose, but the cost had been steep. The ground was littered with the fallen, brave souls who had stood beside him in the darkest hour. Their sacrifice was etched into the very soil, each body a testament to the cost of their victory. Faces, once full of life and promise, were now still and serene. Among the fallen were friends and comrades, their dreams of a peaceful future buried beneath the rubble of their struggle. The village's survivors emerged from their hiding places, their eyes red-rimmed from fear and grief. They looked upon the destruction and the bodies of their loved ones, the weight of their loss pressing heavily upon them. Tears mingled with the dirt on their faces as they searched for familiar figures amidst the chaos. For each person who had returned, there were many more who would never come back. Bjorn's heart ached as he walked through the remains of his home, now nothing more than a shell of its former self. The villagers gathered around the few who had survived, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow. The celebrations that should have followed the victory were replaced with a somber, silent acknowledgement of the cost. The village healer, a woman of great skill and kindness, moved among the injured with a weariness that spoke of long hours and deep despair. Her hands, once steady and sure, now trembled as she worked to tend to the wounded. She had seen many of her friends fall, and each injury she treated was a reminder of what had been lost. In the midst of the grief and despair, the sound of mournful wails and soft sobs filled the air. Families gathered together, clinging to one another for comfort and support. The depth of their loss was felt in every embrace, every whispered word of consolation. The village, though spared from the Draugr's wrath, had paid a price that would be felt for generations. The survivors, despite their overwhelming grief, began to pick up the pieces. They worked together to bury their dead, creating a solemn resting place for those who had sacrificed everything. Each grave was marked with simple stones, engraved with the names of the fallen, a small token of the debt owed to those who had given their lives. Bjorn stood among the graves, the weight of leadership and loss pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of the villagers on him, their hopes and their pain converging in their gaze. The burden of his role was heavy, made heavier by the lives lost in the battle that had saved them all. As the sun continued its ascent, the village began to slowly stir with life again. The survivors, despite their grief, began the arduous task of rebuilding. The work was slow and fraught with sorrow, but it was a necessary step towards healing. They worked not just to restore their homes, but to honor the memory of those who had given their all. Bjorn, exhausted and heartbroken, continued to lead by example. His steps were slow, his voice hoarse from the battle and the strain of loss. Yet, he was determined to see his village through the aftermath. He spoke to the villagers with a quiet strength, urging them to find solace in their unity and to keep the memory of the fallen alive in their hearts. The victory over the Draugr was bittersweet. It had come at a great cost, and the village would carry the scars of that night for years to come. Yet, amidst the grief, there was a glimmer of hope. The people, though deeply wounded, were determined to rebuild and to honor the legacy of those who had fought bravely. As night fell, the village gathered for a simple ceremony. By the flickering light of the fires, they shared stories of the fallen, their voices mingling with the crackling flames. They spoke of courage and sacrifice, of lives lived with honor. In the stories, amidst the tears and the pain, there was a flicker of hope, a promise that the darkness would not define them. Bjorn, standing among his people, felt the weight of their shared grief and the strength of their resolve. The Draugr was gone, defeated by the bravery of those who had fought and the power of the legendary weapon. But the victory had come with a cost that was deeply felt by all. As the village began to heal, the memory of the battle and those who had fallen would remain etched in their hearts. The night of terror was over, but its shadows would always be a part of their story. The victory was theirs, but it was a victory marked by both triumph and loss. The village, once vibrant and bustling, now lay shrouded in a blanket of grief. The morning sun rose over the ruins, casting long shadows on the charred and broken remains of homes and fields. It was a new day, but it brought no solace. The battle with the Draugr was over, but its aftermath left a heavy weight on every heart. The villagers gathered in the central square, their faces etched with sorrow. The area was lined with makeshift memorials, simple wooden crosses, stones engraved with names, and wreaths of wildflowers. These were the only tributes they could offer to those who had given their lives to protect them. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut flowers and the smoky remnants of the recent fires. Children who had once played in these streets now stood in quiet clusters, holding tightly to their parents' hands. Their laughter was replaced by a heavy silence, their innocent eyes reflecting the deep sadness that enveloped the village. Each child looked at the empty spaces where homes used to stand, their small faces mirroring the loss felt by the adults. Mothers and fathers, their faces lined with exhaustion and grief, held each other for comfort. They stood beside the graves of their loved ones, their heads bowed in mourning. Many of them had lost husbands, wives, sons, and daughters. Their tears fell freely, mingling with the dirt as they remembered the lives that had been so abruptly taken. Bjorn walked among the grieving crowd, his heart heavy with the burden of leadership and loss. His eyes, once fierce with determination, now held a deep sadness. The weight of the recent battle was visible in the way he carried himself, each step a reminder of the friends he had lost and the sacrifice they had made. The village healer, her hands trembling from exhaustion, worked tirelessly to tend to those who were injured and grieving. Her eyes, once full of hope and strength, now reflected the strain of having seen so many lives changed forever. She moved with a quiet grace, her presence a source of comfort amid the overwhelming sorrow. In the midst of the grief, the villagers began to gather to share stories of the fallen. Around the central fire, they spoke of bravery and sacrifice, of moments of courage that had shone through the darkness. Each story was a testament to the lives that had been lived with honor and love, and as they shared these memories, the pain of loss was momentarily softened by the warmth of shared recollections. The survivors, though deeply wounded, started to work on rebuilding their homes and their lives. With every brick set and every piece of wood nailed into place, they were creating a new beginning from the ashes of their past. The work was slow and difficult, but it was driven by a collective determination to honor the memory of those they had lost. They rebuilt not just their homes, but their sense of community, weaving their grief into a shared purpose. The nights were particularly hard, as the village gathered for quiet vigils. By the light of the fires, they sang mournful songs and recited poems that spoke of their pain and their hope. The flames cast flickering shadows that danced over the faces of those gathered, their expressions a mix of sorrow and resilience. The warmth of the fire provided a small comfort, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still light to be found. Bjorn stood among the villagers, his own grief mingling with theirs. He watched as they worked, their faces set in determined lines. He saw the strength they drew from one another, the quiet solidarity that bound them together in their shared loss. The rebuilding was a way to cope, to find meaning in the midst of devastation. Each small act of reconstruction was a tribute to those who had fallen, a promise that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. As days turned into weeks, the village began to show signs of recovery. The once damaged homes were gradually being repaired, and the fields, though scarred, were being tended to once more. The laughter of children began to return, albeit softly, as the village slowly found its footing again. The process of healing was slow, but with every passing day, the village was slowly being restored, both in spirit and in structure. Yet, despite the progress, the memory of those who had been lost was ever present. The villagers made sure to keep their memory alive through stories and rituals. They held annual ceremonies to honor the fallen, ensuring that their names and deeds were remembered by future generations. Their bravery was celebrated, and their stories were passed down as lessons in courage and sacrifice. Bjorn continued to lead with a somber yet hopeful spirit. He understood the pain of loss, but he also saw the strength and resilience that the village had shown. He knew that while the scars of the battle would remain, they would also serve as a reminder of the unity and courage that had seen them through the darkest of times. The village was no longer the same as before the Draugr's attack, but it was something new, a community forged in the fires of adversity, bound together by the shared experience of grief and the determination to rebuild. In their mourning, they found a renewed sense of purpose, a collective strength that would carry them forward. As the sun set on another day of rebuilding and reflection, the village stood together, their hearts heavy but their spirits unbroken. They had faced unimaginable loss, but they had also discovered the depths of their own resilience. The path to healing was long, but with each step, they moved closer to finding peace amidst their sorrow. The village was quiet as dusk began to settle, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink. It had been a while since the Draugr's defeat, and though the wounds were healing, the scars of battle lingered. Among the villagers, hope and sorrow intertwined like threads in a tapestry. It was in this fragile moment that the protagonist's silhouette appeared on the horizon, walking slowly towards home. The sight of him, walking alone with a weary yet determined gait, brought a stir among the villagers. His return was like a distant echo from a storm, reminding them of battles fought and sacrifices made. The protagonist was no longer the same person who had left months before. Each step he took was heavy with memories, and his eyes, though resolute, carried the weight of profound change. As he approached the village, he could see the familiar faces of his friends and family, their expressions a mix of surprise and cautious hope. The village square, once filled with chaos and fear, now lay in a serene stillness. The makeshift memorials to the fallen had become part of the landscape, their presence a somber reminder of the cost of their victory. The protagonist's heart ached as he passed by the memorials, each one a testament to those he had lost. He paused briefly, touching a wooden cross with the name of a dear friend, a warrior who had fought beside him. The memories of shared laughter and fierce battles flooded back, and he closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. The villagers gathered around him, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. They had heard stories of his bravery and the fierce battles he had fought, but seeing him in person brought the reality of those stories to life. Children, who had heard tales of the hero's journey, stared with wide eyes, their curiosity mingled with awe. The women and men who had watched from the sidelines as the village was rebuilt now saw the face of the one who had led the fight. His family, standing at the forefront, looked at him with eyes that told stories of their own. His mother's hands trembled as she reached out to embrace him, her eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. His father, usually stoic and reserved, looked at him with a softness that spoke of both gratitude and sorrow. The embrace they shared was a mixture of silent understanding and the comfort of being reunited after a long, harrowing ordeal. As the protagonist walked through the village, he saw the changes time had wrought. Homes that had been destroyed were now rebuilt, though their scars were still visible. Fields that had once been barren were now being tended to, and new shoots of life were beginning to emerge. The resilience of the village was evident in every corner, and yet, it was clear that the struggle had left its mark. The protagonist's return was not met with grand celebrations or loud cheers. Instead, it was marked by a quiet, reverent acknowledgement of the journey he had undertaken. The villagers gathered around him in a solemn assembly, each one reflecting on their own experiences and the impact of his leadership. They understood that his return was not just the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where healing and understanding would be key. His closest friends, those who had shared the battlefield with him and knew the depths of his sacrifice, approached with a mixture of relief and sadness. They embraced him with a familiarity that spoke of shared suffering and mutual respect. They exchanged stories in hushed tones, recounting moments of valor and loss, their voices carrying the weight of their shared experiences. In the evening, as the village settled into the quiet of the night, the protagonist found a moment of solitude by the river. The gentle murmur of the water and the soft glow of the moon provided a backdrop to his reflections. He looked out over the landscape, taking in the changes that had occurred while he was away. Each sight was a reminder of the journey he had been on and the cost of their victory. The river, winding through the village, seemed to symbolize the passage of time and the flow of life. The protagonist thought about the future and the role he would play in it. The battles were over, but the scars would remain, and the process of healing would take time. He knew that the village needed him, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. As he gazed at the night sky, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for those who had stood by him, for the courage they had shown, and for the strength of the village. The protagonist's return marked not just the end of a struggle, but the beginning of a new phase of rebuilding and renewal. He was changed, scarred but stronger, and his presence brought a quiet strength to the village, a reminder of what they had overcome and what they could still achieve together. With the dawn approaching, the protagonist prepared to take his place among his people once more. His return was a testament to the enduring spirit of the village and a reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always hope. The journey had left its mark on him, but it also offered a new beginning, a chance to build on the lessons learned and the strength gained. The first light of dawn spread across the village, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. It was the start of a new chapter, a day the villagers had longed for with every beat of their hearts. The Draugr, once a shadow over their lives, was now a memory fading into the past. The village, still scarred but resilient, prepared to embrace the promise of a fresh beginning. The air was filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. The previous night had been filled with celebration, but as the morning light broke, it was clear that the village was ready to face a new day with hope and determination. Families gathered outside their homes, their faces reflecting a blend of relief and excitement. The sounds of laughter and conversation began to fill the air, blending with the gentle rustling of leaves in the early morning breeze. The protagonist, though weary from his own battles, stood among them, a silent witness to the rebirth of his village. His eyes, once filled with the weight of leadership and loss, now sparkled with a soft glow of hope. He moved through the village, greeting old friends and sharing smiles that spoke volumes. The scars of war were still visible, but they were now intertwined with the threads of recovery and renewal. Children played in the village square, their laughter a joyful contrast to the somber tone of the past months. They ran through the streets, their games of make-believe and tag a testament to their unyielding spirit. Their innocent joy was a reminder of the simple pleasures of life, and their enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time in a long while, the village felt light, unburdened by the constant fears that had once loomed over them. The rebuilding of homes and fields had become a community effort. Villagers worked side by side, repairing structures and planting new crops. The once barren fields were now green with the promise of a bountiful harvest. The sight of new life emerging from the ground symbolized the village's resilience and its determination to move forward. As the day progressed, a sense of unity emerged among the villagers. They worked together, side by side, not just out of necessity but out of a shared commitment to their new beginning. The pain of the past was not forgotten but was woven into the fabric of their collective strength. Each act of rebuilding, each shared smile, and each moment of laughter was a step towards a brighter future. In the heart of the village, the protagonist found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The battles, the losses, and the triumphs were all part of a larger tapestry, one that now included the promise of peace and the opportunity for a new start. He had witnessed the courage of his people, and now, as he looked at their faces, he saw a renewed sense of purpose. A small ceremony was held to honor those who had fallen. The villagers gathered at the memorials, their heads bowed in solemn respect. There were no grand speeches or fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement of the sacrifices made. Flowers were laid at the memorials, and soft words of gratitude were spoken. It was a moment of collective remembrance, a tribute to those who had given so much for the safety and future of their home. As the sun set, casting a soft, amber light over the village, the atmosphere was filled with a profound sense of peace. The village, free from the Draugr's terror, began to look towards the future with hope. The protagonist, surrounded by his people, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path to this moment had been long and arduous, but the dawn of this new chapter was a testament to their enduring strength and unity. The village's new chapter was not just about rebuilding physical structures, but about reclaiming their lives and their sense of community. It was a chance to heal and to honor the past by moving forward with renewed spirit. The Draugr's shadow had been lifted, and in its place, the light of hope and the promise of a better tomorrow shone brightly. The protagonist, having played a crucial role in this transformation, stood with his people, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The village's resilience and unity had turned the page on a dark chapter, and as they looked towards the horizon, they did so with a heart full of hope and a spirit unbroken. The night sky was a blanket of stars, casting a gentle glow over the village as stories began to flow like a river of memories. Around a crackling fire, villagers of all ages gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The air was thick with anticipation as the tales of bravery, sacrifice, and hope took center stage. The night was alive with the echoes of a story that had become a living part of their community's soul. Elderly storytellers, their eyes twinkling with the wisdom of years, took their places around the fire. Their voices, worn yet strong, held a rhythm that drew listeners close. Children sat wide-eyed, their imaginations stirred by the tales of old. The adults, while familiar with the stories, leaned in with a reverent hush, savoring each word as if it were a precious gem. One of the elders began with the beginning of the story, the dark days when the Draugr first cast its shadow over the village. Her voice carried the weight of history, painting vivid scenes of fear and bravery. She spoke of the night the village had been first touched by the Draugr's terror, the restless nights and the desperate calls for help. Her words evoked the chill of those nights, the despair that had gripped their hearts. The story then shifted to the heroic efforts of the protagonist and his allies. The elder's voice grew fiercer as she recounted their courage and resolve. She described the protagonist's journey, the grueling battles, and the moments of doubt and fear that he faced. Every tale was interwoven with emotion, capturing the essence of their struggle and triumph. The listeners could almost feel the pounding of their hearts as the protagonist charged into battle, the weight of the legendary weapon in his hands, and the fierce determination in his eyes. As the fire crackled and sparks danced into the night sky, the tales grew more personal. The villagers remembered those who had fallen, their voices softening with respect and sorrow. The story of each fallen hero was told with a tenderness that made the loss feel fresh, even though many years had passed. Their sacrifices were honored, their bravery celebrated. The pain of their departure was balanced by the pride of their legacy, and the listeners felt the weight of their stories in their hearts. The final chapters of the tale were filled with hope and renewal. The elders spoke of the village's recovery, the strength it found in its people, and the dawn of a new era. Her voice became lighter, filled with the warmth of triumph and the promise of a brighter future. She painted a picture of the village rebuilding, of children playing in the streets, and of a community coming together to create something beautiful from the ashes of the past. As the stories wove through the night, the children listened with rapt attention, their young faces reflecting a mix of awe and inspiration. The elders, with each retelling, passed down not just the events but the emotions and the spirit of those times. The tales were more than just stories, they were a bridge between the past and the future, a way to keep the memory of those brave souls alive in the hearts of the new generation. The night wore on, and the fire's glow began to fade, but the stories continued. The village's collective memory was being shaped anew, each story a thread in the rich tapestry of their history. Parents gathered their children close, whispering the tales softly as their little ones drifted to sleep. The stories of the Draugr and the battle had become bedtime lore, teaching the values of bravery, sacrifice, and hope. The tradition of storytelling continued through the generations. As children grew and became adults, they took on the role of passing on the stories, each adding their own voice and perspective. The tales of the Draugr were told around fires, in quiet moments, and during celebrations. They became a living history, a part of the village's identity, and a testament to their enduring spirit. In the quiet moments of reflection, when the world seemed still, the stories of the Draugr served as a reminder of the strength found in unity and the courage that lies within every heart. The passing down of these stories was more than a tradition, it was a way to honor the past and inspire the future. The village had come full circle, from the dark days of terror to the bright dawn of renewal. The stories were a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. They were a legacy of the courage and resilience that defined them, a testament to the power of unity and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The village had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm, the echoes of past battles fading into the background as life resumed its gentle pace. Yet, just as the villagers began to breathe easier, an unsettling silence began to creep in, whispering of dangers unseen and threats yet to be revealed. It started with subtle signs, unexplained chills that brushed against the skin like icy fingers in the dead of night. At first, the villagers tried to dismiss them as mere tricks of the mind or the last vestiges of fear from their past struggles. But when shadows seemed to stretch and warp in the corners of their vision, unease settled over the village like a heavy fog. Children spoke of strange figures glimpsed in the darkness, fleeting shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The tales were dismissed as fanciful imaginings, yet a growing sense of dread took hold. Parents became more watchful, their eyes scanning the shadows for any hint of danger. Nights were filled with restless sleep and the quiet murmurs of worried conversations. The first tangible sign came one chilly morning when the village's livestock was found scattered and disheveled. Several animals were missing, and those that remained were skittish and uneasy, their eyes wide with fear. The familiar sense of safety began to erode, replaced by an unsettling feeling that something was watching from the darkness. Whispers of strange occurrences began to circulate. An elderly woman reported hearing eerie voices calling her name from the depths of the forest, voices that seemed to echo with a haunting, otherworldly tone. Farmers found their crops trampled and ruined, though no tracks could be seen and no sign of human presence was evident. Every new event seemed to build upon the last, forming a pattern of increasing unease. At the heart of the village, a small group of individuals began to take note of these occurrences. They were the ones who had faced the Draugr and survived its terror. Their bond of shared experience had forged a deep sense of vigilance, and they could sense that something sinister was brewing beneath the surface. One evening, as twilight settled over the village, the air grew heavy with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted in unnatural ways. The group gathered around the fire, their faces etched with concern. They shared their observations and fears, their voices low and filled with worry. The village blacksmith, a man of few words but immense strength, spoke of feeling a strange presence in his workshop. Tools had gone missing, and there were whispers in the dark that seemed to carry a menacing edge. The village healer, known for her calm demeanor, confessed to finding her herbal remedies inexplicably altered, their effects unpredictable and dangerous. As the night wore on, the group's conversation grew more intense. They spoke of old legends, of dark creatures and ancient curses that might be stirring. Their words painted a picture of a world filled with unseen threats, lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. The weight of their shared fears pressed heavily upon them, each person feeling the cold grip of anxiety tightening around their hearts. The silence of the village was punctuated by strange noises, a faint scratching at the windows, the rustling of leaves when no wind blew. The peaceful nights of the past were becoming a distant memory, replaced by an atmosphere thick with apprehension. Every creak of the floorboards, every snap of a twig in the dark seemed to heighten the sense of something lurking just out of sight. The villagers tried to maintain their daily routines, but the shadow of fear loomed large. Children no longer played freely, their laughter had turned into hushed whispers and wary glances over their shoulders. The once vibrant marketplace now buzzed with nervous chatter as people exchanged stories and speculated about the source of their growing fears. One night, as the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie patterns on the ground, a loud, inexplicable roar echoed through the village. It was a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, a chilling cry that pierced the night and sent shivers down every spine. The village was thrown into chaos as people rushed to their homes, locking doors and shuttering windows in a frantic bid for safety. In the midst of this turmoil, the small group of veterans gathered once more, their resolve hardened by the night's events. They knew that the village needed them now more than ever, that the threats they faced were far from over. The knowledge that something was lurking in the shadows, that a new danger was emerging, weighed heavily on them. As the village struggled to regain its composure, the sense of an unseen menace continued to haunt them. The familiar comfort of daily life was overshadowed by the ever-present fear of what might come next. The villagers were left to grapple with the unsettling reality that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve was fragile, and that new, supernatural threats were beginning to reveal themselves. In the quiet moments between the storm of fear and the dawn of hope, the villagers could only wonder what lay ahead. The sense of unease was a constant companion, a reminder that the struggle for safety and peace was far from over. And as the days went by, the stories of strange occurrences and unseen threats became woven into the fabric of their lives, a haunting echo of the battles yet to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow over the village, the protagonist stood alone on a small hill overlooking the land. The battles fought, the sacrifices made, and the victories won were now etched into the very earth beneath their feet. The village was finally at peace, but the echoes of the past still lingered like shadows in the evening light. The protagonist's eyes scanned the village below, where people had begun to rebuild their lives with a quiet determination. The scars of war were slowly healing, but the memories of the Draugr's terror were still vivid in the minds of those who had lived through it. They had fought against an enemy born of ancient curses and dark magic, and in doing so, had become a part of a story that would be told for generations. In the quiet of the evening, the protagonist felt the weight of their journey more acutely than ever. Each step they had taken, each challenge they had overcome, had shaped them into someone different from the person they once were. The battles had been fierce, and the losses had been devastating. Yet, through it all, there was a profound sense of purpose that had guided them. They had faced the darkness head-on, driven by a duty to protect their home and its people. As they stood on the hill, the protagonist thought about the Draugr, the ancient creatures that had caused so much suffering. These beings were not just monsters from old tales, but symbols of fear and despair that had tested the very limits of human courage. Their defeat had come at a great cost, but it had also forged a new chapter in the village's history. The Draugr's legacy, though dark and horrifying, had brought out the best in those who faced them. It had revealed the strength of the human spirit and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. With the village finally safe, the protagonist felt a profound sense of responsibility. The story of the Draugr would live on, not just in the annals of history, but in the hearts and minds of those who had endured the struggle. It was a legacy of bravery, sacrifice, and the enduring fight against the darkness. The protagonist knew that their journey had not just been about defeating a monstrous foe, but about preserving a way of life and protecting the future of their people. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, the protagonist's thoughts turned to the lessons learned through the trials they had faced. The battles against the Draugr had taught them about resilience and the strength that lies within each person. They had learned that even in the darkest of times, hope could be a powerful weapon. And they understood that the legacy of their fight would serve as a beacon for future generations, a reminder of the courage that had prevailed against seemingly insurmountable odds. The protagonist's reflection was interrupted by a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees, carrying with it the soft whispers of the past. The village below was a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, and the protagonist took solace in knowing that their efforts had made a difference. The future was uncertain, and the shadows of the past would always linger, but there was a sense of peace in knowing that the darkness had been faced and overcome. In the quiet moments of reflection, the protagonist understood the importance of vigilance. The battle against the Draugr was not just a story of victory, but a reminder of the constant need to be aware of the threats that might arise. The legacy of the Draugr would serve as a constant reminder to remain watchful and prepared, to honor the sacrifices made, and to protect what had been so dearly earned. The epilogue of this tale was one of eternal vigilance. The protagonist knew that while the Draugr were defeated, the world was full of unseen dangers that could emerge at any moment. The lessons learned from the struggle would guide future generations, teaching them the importance of staying vigilant and ready to confront the shadows that might arise. The story of the Draugr, though dark and filled with sorrow, was also one of triumph and resilience. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring legacy of Norse mythology. As the protagonist looked out over the village, they saw not just the aftermath of a great battle but the dawn of a new era, where the lessons of the past would shape a brighter future. In the end, the protagonist knew that the true legacy of their journey was not just in the defeat of the Draugr, but in the hope and courage that had emerged from the darkness. It was a legacy of enduring strength, a reminder that even in the face of the greatest challenges, there was always the potential for light to shine through. And as the village began to rebuild and move forward, the protagonist's heart was filled with a quiet pride, knowing that their story would continue to inspire and guide those who came after.